In the wilderness, survival is all about life or death. Over the years, trappers, hunters, and pioneers mastered the wild. They built shelter in minutes, set traps that fed them through brutal winters, and traveled hundreds of miles through uncharted wilderness with nothing but instinct and experience to guide them. Today, most of these techniques have faded into history, lost in a world of modern convenience. But out here in the untamed wild, those skills meant everything. Here's what life was really like for the mountain men who carved out existence in North America's most dangerous frontier. Hey, quick thing before we start. If you actually listen to these regularly, hit like or subscribe. I always wonder where everyone's at, so comment your city and what time it is. Weird to think some of you are having breakfast in London while I'm recording this at night here in the States. Alright, let's head back to the American frontier. Trust me, it's going to be quite a ride. But first, get comfortable. Seriously, adjust those pillows, pull up that blanket, because where we're going, you're going to want to be cozy. The cold hits you first. It always does. That knife-edge chill that slices through whatever sleep you manage to find. Your eyes crack open to darkness, the kind of pitch black that makes you wonder if you've gone blind overnight. The rough wool of your bedroll scratches against your face, stiff with frost, despite being tucked under the meagre shelter of pine boughs. October 1831. The Rocky Mountains don't care what month the calendar says. Winter comes when it damn well pleases up here, and it's coming now. You're thinking, wait, how did people actually sleep outside in these temperatures? Good question. Badly. They slept badly, not like your temperature-controlled bedroom with that memory foam mattress. Your body aches from yesterday's 20-mile trek, muscles screaming from climbing ridges, crossing streams, breaking trail, hands raw and cracked from the dry mountain air. The ground beneath you might as well be stone, because it is stone, with just a thin layer of pine needles and one wool blanket between you and the frozen earth. James, you alive over there? The voice comes from a few feet away, gravelly, worn by years of mountain winters and too much whiskey. Old Bill, your reluctant mentor in this life, already stirring despite the ungodly hour. Unfortunately, you croak back, your voice strange to your own ears, after days, with barely a word spoken between you. Sun's coming soon. Bill grunts. Need to check them traps before some damn wolverine beats us to it. Fun fact from a historian I talked to, mountain men didn't talk much. When you spend weeks or months without human contact, you kind of forget how conversations work. Makes social anxiety today seem pretty tame by comparison. The reality of your situation crawls back into your consciousness. You've been in the mountains for nearly 3 months now. A greenhorn, that's what Bill calls you. A city boy from St. Louis who thought trapping beaver would be an adventure, a way to make your fortune in the West. What a damn fool you were. You've learned, though. Had to. The mountains kill the unprepared faster than you can say hypothermia. Your stomach growls, reminding you it's been 2 days since your last proper meal. Stringy rabbit that Bill snared, cooked over a small fire. You're saving the last of the pemmican for true emergency. That's rule 1 up here. Ration like your life depends on it. Because it absolutely does. You hear that? Bill's voice cuts through your thoughts, suddenly alert. You freeze, straining your ears against the pre-dawn silence. Nothing at first, then. A snapping twig, something moving through the trees around your camp. Bear, you whisper, your heart suddenly hammering against your ribs. Bill shakes his head, eyes narrowed. Too careful for bear. The air shifts, a new smell carried on the breeze. Smoke. Wood smoke mixed with something else. the unmistakable scent of other humans. "Black feet," Bill whispers, so low you barely hear it. Oh shit. I should explain something here. In 1831, the Blackfeet weren't exactly thrilled about trappers in their territory, like, kill you and take your scalp. Not thrilled. Not without reason. Trappers were basically resource thieves from their perspective. Your hand finds the rifle beside your bedroll, fingers curling around cold metal. Easy, Bill murmurs. No need to die today. I know what you're thinking. Just shoot them. Yeah, that's a great way to get very dead very fast. Blackfeet warriors weren't exactly intimidated by one gun against potentially dozens of them. Bill slowly, carefully reaches for his possible bag, a leather pouch containing all his personal items. From it, he pulls something small, wrapped in cloth. "Trade beads," he mouths silently. The sky is lightening now, faintest grey pushing back the darkness. Through the trees you catch glimpses of movement, not just one or two shapes, many. "When they come," Bill whispers, "you let me talk. You don't touch that rifle unless I say. You understand?" You nod, mouth too dry to form words. The mountains are harsh, but the people, both native and newcomers, those are who you really had to worry about. Trust was as valuable as beaver pelts, and twice as rare. This situation, this is Tuesday for a mountain man. The constant knowledge that you're one wrong move away from death, not from wild animals or freezing or starving, though those are definitely on the table, but from other humans who see you as a threat or as walking supplies they need more than you do. You're suddenly very aware that your comfortable bed is thousands of miles and 190 years away. The first warrior steps into the clearing, tall, face-painted red and black, a trade musket in his hands. Behind him, more emerge from the trees, 7, 8, 9 of them, all armed. Bill slowly, carefully sits up, keeping his hands visible. His face shows nothing. Not fear, not anger, just a flat neutrality that comes from years of these encounters. "Speak any English?" Bill asks, his voice steady. The lead warrior says nothing, dark eyes moving from Bill to you, then to your small camp, assessing, calculating. "We got trade," Bill says, holding up the beads, then gesturing to their packs. "Tobacco, too. You barely breathe, certain each heartbeat is your last. Your rifle seems impossibly far away now, useless against so many." The warrior speaks, not to Bill, but to the others behind him, a rapid flow of words you don't understand. "What's happening?" you mouth to Bill. He doesn't answer, his attention locked on the exchange happening among the warriors. The lead warrior steps forward, points at your packs, then at the stream nearby. "They want to know if we've seen beaver sign," Bill translates, asking if we're trapping this valley. And just like that, you understand. They're not here to kill you, at least not yet. They're checking their hunting grounds, seeing if you're depleting the resource they also depend on. "Tell them we just got here," you whisper. "Tell them we're passing through." Bill nods, speaks in broken Blackfoot mixed with hand signs, points west, makes motion of travelling, shows empty hands to indicate no traps set yet. The lead warrior considers this, speaks again. Bill's shoulders relax slightly. They're moving on, but they want the beads and some coffee. "That's it?" you ask, disbelieving. "That's it," Bill confirms. "For now." The transaction is quick. Bill hands over the beads and a small pouch of coffee grounds. The warriors take them without comment, then as quickly as they appeared, melt back into the forest. You release a breath you didn't realize you were holding. "Jesus Christ," you whisper. "I thought we were dead." Bill gives a short laugh, the sound rusty from disuse. "Days young. Still plenty of time for dying." mountain men had a different relationship with death than we do. It wasn't some distant, sanitized concept. It was a daily neighbor, the guy who might come knocking any minute. "Let's get moving," Bill says, already rolling up his bedding. "Need to be at the river by midday." And just like that, you're packing up. The sun's barely cresting the mountains, painting the snow-dusted peaks gold and pink. Any other time you'd call it beautiful. Now it just means you've survived another night. That's the first thing I learned researching mountain men. Survival wasn't an exceptional circumstance. It was the daily condition. Every single day was about making it to the next one. As you follow Bill down the slope toward the river valley, your mind drifts to what awaits you there. The whole reason you're in this godforsaken wilderness to begin with: beaver. Those flat-tailed, buck-toothed engineers of the waterways were worth their weight in gold back then, or more accurately, their pelts were. A single prime beaver pelt could fetch 4 sixtels in 1831. That's like $120, $180 today, all for a fancy hat back east. "Stop wool gathering," Bill grunts over his shoulder. "Watch where you're stepping." You focus back on the trail, or what passes for one, a game path, barely visible, winding through pine and aspen. One wrong step on these slopes could mean a broken ankle, and a broken ankle out here might as well put a gun to your head. "How much further to the river?" you ask, adjusting the heavy pack on your shoulders. Bill doesn't turn around. "When we get there, we'll be there." Classic mountain man answer. These guys didn't wear watches, didn't carry calendars. Time was measured in seasons, in daylight, in distance travelled. Speaking of which, I spent an embarrassing amount of time researching how far mountain men typically travelled in a day. The answer, it varied wildly. On good terrain, maybe 15-20 miles. In mountains or bad weather, sometimes just 3 to 5. They weren't trying to set records, they were trying to not die. 2 hours later, you're soaked with sweat despite the cold. The slope has grown steeper, the forest denser. Your thighs burn with the effort of picking through deadfall and rock. Then you hear it, the distant rush of water. Bill pauses, head cocked, listening. River's up, spring melt's still coming down from the high country. That's not great news. High water means dangerous trapping. Another hour of hard hiking brings you to a clearing, and there it is, the river. Not some gentle bubbling stream, but a churning, frothing monster cutting through the valley like a liquid knife. "Now we get to work," Bill says, dropping his pack. "This is where the real business of being a mountain man begins. Not the romanticized horseback riding through stunning vistas that you see in paintings. The brutal, exhausting, often disgusting work of harvesting beaver." "First thing," Bill says, opening his pack, "we need to make bait." He pulls out a small, dark object wrapped in oilcloth, unwraps it carefully. "What is that?" you ask, though the smell already gives you a clue. Sharp, musky, like nothing you've encountered before. "Castor gland," Bill says, holding up what looks like a shriveled, dark brown lump about the size of your thumb. "From the last beaver I took, back in April." The experts I talked to said this was basically a beaver's ball sack, I asked one historian. "Not exactly," he said. "Castor glands are located near the beaver's back end, but they're not testicles. They produce a substance called castoreum that beavers use to mark their territory." Whatever the anatomical specifics, the important thing was this. It stank, and beavers could smell it from remarkable distances. You watch as Bill takes out a small pot and begins to prepare the bait. He adds the gland, then pulls small pouches from his possible bag. Cinnamon, he explains, adding a pinch of brown powder, clove, nutmeg, and he pulls out a flask, pouring a splash of amber liquid into the mixture. Whiskey! The resulting paste looks like something you'd scrape off your boot, but to a beaver, apparently irresistible. Why does that work, you ask, trying not to gag at the smell? Bill shrugs. Smells like another beaver. Males think it's competition. Females think it's a mate. Either way, they come looking. That's the brilliant simplicity of frontier knowledge. No scientific papers, no controlled experiments, just generations of trial and error passed down by those who lived to pass it down. Now for the traps, Bill says, moving to the river's edge. The traps themselves are brutal in their efficiency, made of forged iron weighing around 5 pounds each with powerful spring mechanisms and steel jaws. They're designed to catch a beaver by the leg and hold it until the trapper returns. Usually we'd set these underwater, Bill explains, wading into the shallows. Beaver swims up, triggered by the bait, steps on the pan, and snap. He demonstrates, setting the trigger mechanism with practiced ease. But with the river this high, we adapt. Instead of submerging the trap, Bill finds a small channel where beavers might travel between their lodge and feeding areas. He carefully positions the trap there, covering it with leaves and mud until it's nearly invisible. We secure it with a stake, he continues, hammering a length of wood into the ground and attaching a chain from the trap. Otherwise, beaver drags it into deep water and drowns before we get back. You might be thinking, isn't drowning the beaver the point? Actually, no. A drowned beaver's fur soaks up water, making the pelt harder to preserve. Trappers preferred to find the animal alive when possible, which, meant they had to kill it themselves. Mountain men weren't sentimental about this stuff. It was business, pure and simple. Now the bait, Bill says, taking a small amount of the foul-smelling paste and smearing it on a stick, which he positions near the trap. Beaver smells this, gets curious, steps right in the trap. You help Bill set 4 more traps along the river, learning the technique as you go. It's precise work, requiring attention to detail and knowledge of beaver behavior. We'll check these at dawn tomorrow, Bill says as you finish the last one. Now we need shelter. The sky has clouded over during your work, the temperature dropping noticeably. In the mountains, weather changes faster than your Instagram feed. Looks like snow, you observe, eyeing the grey mass of clouds. Bill nods. Before nightfall, need to get a proper shelter up. Not like the basic bedrolls under pine boughs from last night. With snow coming, exposure becomes your biggest threat. What kind of shelter, you ask? Wiki up, Bill answers. Simple, effective. I spent some time with a wilderness survival expert learning about frontier shelters. Mountain men borrowed heavily from Native Americans, he told me. The wickiup was basically a small dome-shaped structure made with a framework of poles covered with brush, bark, or hides. You spend the next 2 hours gathering materials, cutting saplings for the frame, collecting pine boughs, stripping bark from deadfall. The work is hard but warms you against the increasingly bitter wind. Bill directs the construction with few words, showing rather than telling how to bend and secure the saplings to create a dome about 5 feet high and 8 feet across. Big enough for 2 men and a small fire, he says, stepping back to assess the frame. Now cover it. You layer pine boughs over the structure, starting from the bottom and working up, creating overlapping rows like shingles to shed water, or in this case, snow. By the time you finish, fat white flakes are already beginning to fall. The forest around you quiets, sound dampened by the snowfall. The river continues its rush, but everything else seems to hold its breath. Get firewood, Bill orders, dry as you can find, under fallen logs, inside hollow trees. You scavenge while Bill creates a small fire pit inside the wickiup, carefully clearing a space and surrounding it with river rocks. As darkness falls, you crawl into the shelter with an armload of the driest wood you could find. Bill has a small fire already catching, the smoke rising to a hole he's left at the top of the structure. Not too big, he warns, just enough for warmth. Too much smoke inside will blind us. The small space warms quickly, though smoke does sting your eyes despite Bill's careful fire management. You sit with your back against the curved wall, watching the snow fall through the smoke hole above. Will the traps still work in the snow? You ask. Bill nods. Beaver don't care about snow. They keep working. So do we. He pulls out some jerky from his possible bag, hands you a piece. It's hard as wood, tasting of salt and smoke. You have to suck on it for several minutes before it's soft enough to chew, but it's food, and out here, that's all that matters. Tomorrow, Bill says between bites, we check traps at first light, then move downstream, set more. How many beaver do we need, you ask, for it to be worth all this? Bill considers the question. 30, 40 prime pelts would make for a good season. That's about all we can carry anyway. 40 beaver pelts at roughly $5 each, $200, equivalent to over $6,000 today. Not bad for a few months' work, if you survive. What about the Blackfeet, you ask, the morning's encounter still fresh in your mind? Bill shrugs. We keep watch. We move quick. We don't stay in one place too long. The snow falls heavier now, visible through the smoke hole as swirling white against black. Inside your rough shelter, the small fire casts dancing shadows on the walls. Despite the discomfort, the smoke, the hard ground, the persistent cold touching any body part, not directly facing the flames. There's a primitive satisfaction to the moment. You've made it through another day in a place that doesn't care if you live or die. Bill, you say after a long silence, how long have you been doing this? The older man stares into the small fire. 15 winters, he finally answers. Started when St. Louis was barely more than a trading post. What keeps you coming back, you ask? You gesture at the wilderness beyond your shelter walls. Bill doesn't answer immediately. When he does, his voice is quiet. Out here, a man knows exactly where he stands. Nature don't lie to you, don't cheat you, try to kill you, sure, but it's honest about it. He pokes at the fire with a stick. Cities are full of smiling men who'd slit your throat for $1. At least out here you see the knife coming. The mountain men weren't just skilled survivors. They were people choosing a brutal freedom over what they saw as a dishonest civilization. Something to think about while you're lying in your comfortable, safe, modern bed. The fire pops, sending a spark onto your leg. You brush it away, feeling the cold creep back in as the flames dwindle. Get some sleep, Bill says. Dawn comes early and the beaver won't wait. You settle onto your bedroll, using your pack as a pillow. Outside, the wind picks up, whistling through the trees. Snow patters gently on the pine boughs covering your shelter. Despite the hard ground beneath you, exhaustion pulls at your limbs. The last thing you see before closing your eyes is Bill, still sitting up, knife in one hand, staring at the smoke hole above as if expecting something to come through it at any moment. And you realize he probably is. Because in the wilderness of 1831, survival wasn't just a skill, it was everything. Morning comes with the kind of cold that makes your bones ache. You wake to the sound of Bill stirring the fire back to life, the small flames casting just enough light to see his frost-bearded face in the pre-dawn darkness. Outside, snow has blanketed the world, 6 inches at least, transforming the forest into something alien and silent. Trap line. Bill grunts, handing you a piece of jerky for breakfast. Eat while we move. Your body protests as you roll up from the ground. Everything hurts. Your back from sleeping on stone. Your hands from yesterday's work. Your feet from miles of mountain hiking in boots that still haven't broken in properly. This is what they don't put in the adventure books. The constant grinding discomfort of frontier life. What if the traps are buried in snow, you ask, voice rough from smoke and sleep. Bill gives you a look that clearly says he thinks you're an idiot. We find 'em, right. Of course, you crawl out of the wiki-up into a world transformed. The snow catches the first grey light of dawn, soft blue shadows stretching across untouched white. It would be beautiful if you weren't about to wade through it. Stay in my tracks, Bill orders, stepping out first, breaking trail through the fresh powder. You follow, grateful for the slightly easier path he creates. The snow is deeper than it looked, coming halfway up your shins with each step. Within minutes, your feet are numb and your pants are soaked to the knee. Remind me why we can't just wait for the snow to melt, you mutter. Bill doesn't even turn around. 'Cause we'll starve before spring, boy. Fair point. Mountain men didn't have the luxury of sick days or weather delays. Nature doesn't care about your comfort. Either you adapt or you die. The river looks different in morning light, still dangerous, but the snow along its banks softens its appearance. Bill leads you to the first trap, memory guiding him more than any visible markers. Here, he says, stopping at what looks like just another patch of snow-covered ground. He kneels, brushes away the white powder, and reveals the chain leading to the trap. Gives it a tug. Resistance. Got something, he says, a rare hint of satisfaction in his voice. He pulls steadily on the chain, drawing up the trap from beneath a layer of wet leaves and mud. And there it is. A large beaver. Leg caught in the steel jaws, very much dead. Drowned itself, Bill observes, examining the animal. Pulled the trap into deeper water despite the stake. The beaver is bigger than you expected, maybe 30 pounds, with rich dark fur and that iconic flat tail. Its small front paws look almost human, like tiny hands. Something about that makes this harder to look at than you anticipated. Don't go soft, Bill warns, catching your expression. Ain't a pet. I know, you say quickly, just bigger than I thought. Bill nods. Good size. Prime pelt. He reaches for his knife, not the small one he keeps in his belt, but a larger one from his pack. Now you learn the next part. The next part, it turns out, is skinning the beaver. Bill works with practiced efficiency, making an initial cut around the animal's hind legs, then essentially pulling the hide off like a wet sock, turning it inside out as he goes. Keep the fur side in, he instructs as you watch. Keeps it clean, makes it easier to flesh later. The smell is something, a mix of wet animal, river mud, and something musky that must be uniquely beaver. Not pleasant, but you're starting to realize that pleasant smells are a luxury of civilization. What about the meat, you ask as Bill finishes removing the pelt. Edible, Bill says. Some parts better than others. We'll take the tail and the back legs. Rest goes back to the forest. Wait, beaver tail is edible? People eat the tail. Bill actually cracks something close to a smile, mostly fat. Good eating in winter. I looked this up. Beaver tail was considered a delicacy among mountain men and native tribes. It's almost entirely fat, which made it incredibly valuable in an environment where calories meant survival. Trappers would roast it over fire until the scaly outer part could be peeled off, revealing the fatty tissue inside. With the beaver processed, Bill resets the trap and moves on to the next location. You follow, now carrying one wet beaver pelt and a few pounds of meat wrapped in a piece of oilcloth. The second trap is empty, though clearly disturbed. Something set it off, Bill mutters, examining the mechanism. Could have been anything. Branch in the current, muskrat, even a fish. He resets it carefully, using more of the caster bait to refresh the scent. The third trap holds another beaver, smaller than the first, but still a good size. This one is alive. Step back, Bill warns as you approach. The beaver thrashes when it sees you, teeth bared, trying to drag itself and the trap toward the water. Those teeth, I read that beaver incisors can be up to 20 centimeters long. Basically nature's chisels. They can fell a 12-inch diameter tree in under an hour. Imagine what they could do to your leg. Bill approaches the animal from behind, and with a single precise blow of a short club he keeps in his belt, dispatches it. The efficiency is almost merciful, no prolonged suffering. Now you do the skinning, he says, stepping back. You hesitate, knife in hand. I don't want to mess up the pelt. You will, Bill says flatly. Only way to learn is to ruin a few. Better to ruin this small one than a prime pelt later. So you kneel in the snow and try to mimic what you saw Bill do earlier. Your cuts are hesitant, your hands clumsy in the cold. The hide doesn't separate as easily as it did when Bill did it. You're cutting too deep, he corrects, just through the skin, not into the meat. You adjust, finding the right pressure. It's disturbingly intimate work, this separation of skin from flesh. By the time you finish, your hands are bloody to the wrists and the pelt is, well, not as neat as Bill's, but intact. It'll do, Bill says, which from him is practically a standing ovation. The fourth and fifth traps are empty, though Bill seems unsurprised. 1 in 3 is good odds, he explains as you hike back to camp. 2 in 5 is excellent. At the wiki-up, Bill shows you the next step in processing the pelts. Fleshing, he explains, taking the first pelt and spreading it on a smooth log he's positioned near the fire. The hide is inside out, the fur protected, the skin side, still with bits of fat and membrane attached, facing up. He takes a specialized tool from his pack, a dull curved blade attached to a handle. Fleshing knife, he explains, too sharp and you'll cut through the hide. You watch as he scrapes the skin side, removing every last bit of fat and tissue. Clean hide takes the tanning better, he explains. Any flesh left will rot, ruin the pelt. After demonstrating on the first beaver, he hands you the tool. Your turn. Your attempts are slow, too cautious at first, then too aggressive. Bill adjusts your technique with gruff instructions. By the time you finish the second pelt, your arms ache, but the hide is clean. Now we stretch them, Bill says. He produces several metal hoops from his pack, circular frames about 2 feet in diameter. In the old days, we'd make these from willow branches, he explains. These travel better. The wet pelts are stretched over the hoops, the edges secured with small wooden pins pushed through the skin into the frame. When finished, they look like furry tambourines. They'll dry by tomorrow, Bill says. Then we pack them and move on. That's it? You ask. Bill shakes his head. That's just the start. At Rendezvous, we'll sell these to the company men. They'll send them east, where they'll be properly tanned and made into hats. The famous beaver hats, the entire reason for your presence in this wilderness. The fashion that drove men to the edges of the known world, risking death daily. What about the meat? You ask, nodding to the beaver parts you brought back. Stew, Bill says, but first we need to do something about those clothes of yours. You look down at your pants, soaked from the snow and now starting to freeze as the temperature drops again. Your once fine St. Louis garments were never meant for this life. What's wrong with my clothes? Bill snorts. Cotton kills, boy. Gets wet, stays wet, you freeze to death. Need something that works in this country. Like what? Buckskin, Bill says simply, and lucky for you, I got a hide nearly ready. From his pack, Bill pulls a rolled deer hide, not a pelt like the beaver. This has clearly been through some kind of tanning process already. Shot a small buck 3 days before I found you, he explains. Been working this hide at night while you sleep. Wait, you haven't been sleeping? No wonder he's always awake before you. Bill shrugs. Sleep when necessary. This was more important. Can't have you dying from wet clothes. There's a weird kind of care in his gruffness. He might not like you much, but he's invested in keeping you alive. Bill spreads the hide on the ground outside the wiki up. The snow has stopped, though the air remains frigid. First step in making buckskin is getting a fresh hide, he explains. Then you do the same as with the beaver, flesh it, get all the meat and fat off. The hide, he shows you, is clean, the hair already removed, leaving just the skin. Had to scrape the hair off, he explains. Different from beaver, we want the fur on those, but for buckskin, we want just the leather. One of the things people don't think about with historical clothing is that there weren't really waterproof fabrics. Wool stayed warm even when wet, but got heavy. Buckskin was lightweight and good at blocking wind, but had other quirks. Mountain men had to know what worked for each condition. Now comes the important part, Bill says, picking up a small wooden bowl he's had sitting by the fire. Inside is a greyish mass that looks like, oh God. Is that, you start, already knowing the answer? Brains, Bill confirms. From the deer, every animal has just enough brains to tan its own hide. That's not just a mountain man saying, it's actually true for most animals. A deer's brain has enough oils and lecithin to adequately tan its own hide. Nature's perfect recycling system. You watch, fascinated and slightly nauseated, as Bill mixes the brains with warm water into a paste. He works this mixture deep into the hide, covering every inch of the surface. Brain oils break down the fibres, he explains as he works, makes the hide soft, supple, otherwise it dries hard as a board. The smell is distinctive. Not as bad as you feared, but definitely not something you'd want as a cologne. This stays on overnight, Bill says, rolling up the hide with the brain mixture inside. Tomorrow we'll wash it and start working it. That night you sleep better despite the cold and the hard ground. Exhaustion is winning out over discomfort. You dream of beaver teeth and men wearing hides, of rivers rushing with gold coins instead of water. You wake to Bill's voice. Up, got work to do. The morning is clear, the sun rising in a cloudless sky that promises at least temporary better weather. After a breakfast of beaver tail, which is actually surprisingly good, rich and fatty like bone marrow, Bill retrieves the deer hide. Now we wash out the brains, he says, taking the hide to the river's edge. You help him rinse the hide thoroughly in the cold water. The brain mixture washes away, leaving the hide lighter in colour. Next part is the real work, Bill says, bringing the wet hide back to camp. For the next 2 hours you watch and then help as Bill demonstrates the process of softening the hide. This involves stretching, pulling and working every inch of the material as it dries. Keep it moving, Bill instructs. If it dries stiff, all that brain work was for nothing. You take turns pulling the hide over a smooth log, using your body weight to create tension, then working it with your hands, massaging the fibers. It's exhausting physical labor, the kind that makes your shoulders burn and fingers cramp. In the old days, Bill says between pulls, native women would chew the hide to soften it. Chew it? You repeat, horrified. Bill nods. Hours of chewing. Every inch makes for the softest buckskin. You look down at the hide in your hands with newfound appreciation. Think I'll stick with this method. By midday, the hide has transformed from a stiff, raw material to something soft and flexible, almost like cloth but stronger. The colour has changed too to a soft, yellowish tan. Not done yet, Bill says, just as you think the work might be finished. Most important step left, which is smoking, Bill says. Raw tanned hide gets wet. It stiffens right back up. Smoking fixes that. Bill constructs a small specialized fire pit a short distance from your wickiup. It's essentially a hole in the ground with a mound built up around it. Needs smoke, not flame, he explains, filling the pit with rotten wood and damp, punky logs that he's collected from the forest floor. I actually tried to find exactly what punky wood is. It refers to wood that's partially decomposed, soft and spongy from fungal activity. It smoulders rather than burns with flame, producing lots of thick smoke, perfect for this application. With the smoke-producing fire ready, Bill sews the buckskin into a rough bag shape with sinew, thin, strong fibres from animal tendons that serve as thread. He leaves one end open. Now we let the smoke do its work, he says, setting up a tripod of sticks over the fire pit. He hangs the buckskin bag from this frame, the open end at the bottom positioned over the smoking pit. He places stones around the bottom edge to hold it in place and trap the smoke inside. Smoke goes in, can't get out, he explains. Penetrates every fibre. The rich, thick smoke billows up into the buckskin bag, inflating it like a primitive balloon. The smell is earthy and strong, not unpleasant but pervasive. You know instinctively that this smell will never fully leave the hide. How long does this take, you ask? Hours, Bill says. Sometimes a day, depends on the hide. The smoke. While the buckskin smokes, Bill turns his attention to the beaver pelts still drying on their hoops. Another day for these, he assesses, touching one carefully. Then we pack them for travel. The rhythm of mountain life becomes clearer to you now. Everything has a process, a timing that can't be rushed. Nature sets the schedule and humans adapt. The snow, the river, the animals, the sun all dictate what can be done and when. Late in the afternoon, Bill checks the smoking buckskin. Satisfied with the colour, now a rich golden brown, he removes it from the smoke frame. Done, he announces, laying it out. Now we can make you something useful. The material has transformed again, still soft and flexible, but now with that distinctive smoky colour and scent that marks real buckskin. Bill cuts into it with his knife, working without any pattern or template, just knowledge carried in his hands from years of necessity. He cuts a simple shirt shape, really more of a pullover, and then leggings that can be tied to a belt. Try these, he says, handing you the rough-cut buckskin pieces, better than what you've got. You slip the buckskin shirt over your cotton one. Immediately, you feel the difference. It blocks the wind completely, something your city clothes never managed. The leggings, too, when tied over your wet pants, provide immediate relief from the biting cold. This is amazing, you admit, moving around to test the fit. Ain't pretty, Bill acknowledges, but it'll keep you alive. It's strange to wear something so primitive, yet undeniably practical. No buttons, no fancy stitching, no fashionable cut, just function. Your fine St. Louis clothes now seem ridiculous in comparison, like trying to survive the wilderness in a tuxedo. What makes buckskin so good? You ask, genuinely curious now. Bill considers for a moment, not a man used to explaining things that are obvious to him. Breathes, he finally says. Keeps wind out, but sweat can escape. Dries quick if it gets wet. Strong, won't tear in brush. Quiet, won't make noise when you're hunting. He touches the material at your shoulder, and with the smoking, it stays soft even after getting wet. You're beginning to understand that mountain men weren't just tough, they were practical scientists in their own way. Everything they did had a reason, refined through generations of trial and deadly error. As evening approaches, you help Bill prepare another meal, this time a stew made from the beaver meat, enhanced with a few dried roots and herbs from his possible bag. It's rich and gamey, but hot and filling. Tomorrow we check the traps again, Bill says as darkness falls. Then we move downstream. Need to set more. How far do we go, you ask? Until we find good beaver sign or hit Blackfeet territory, Bill answers. Then we turn and work back upstream. The life of constant movement. No home except what you carry or build each night. That buckskin will be your second skin out here, Bill adds, nodding at your new clothing. Treat it right. It'll last years. You look down at the rough garment, already feeling attached to it. This isn't just clothing, it's a tangible symbol of adaptation, of leaving behind the city boy and becoming something new. I've seen men die from the simplest things out here, Bill says, his voice low as he stares into the small fire. Not the bears or the Indians that get most, it's the little things. Wrong clothes, wet feet, not enough food stored, pride, you echo. Bill nods. Too proud to admit they don't know something? Too proud to change? He gestures at your buckskin shirt. City men come out here thinking they know better than those who've lived it. Nature sorts that thinking out real quick. The fire crackles in the silence that follows. Outside, an owl calls into the night. The temperature is dropping fast with the darkness, stars appearing in brilliant clusters through the smoke hole of your shelter. Get some sleep, Bill finally says. Dawn comes early. Always dawn. Always more work. The endless cycle of survival. You settle onto your bedroll, the ground no softer than before, but somehow your body less resistant to it, adapting like the buckskin, becoming something different with each passing day. Through half-closed eyes, you watch Bill cleaning his knife meticulously before sleep. Always prepared. Always thinking ahead to the next need, the next threat. Bill, you murmur, sleep already pulling at you. Thanks for the buckskin. He doesn't look up from his knife. Ain't kindness, just practical. But you're starting to understand that out here, keeping someone alive is the greatest kindness possible. As you drift towards sleep, you run your fingers over the soft buckskin of your new shirt, from deer to clothing in a matter of days, from living animal to survival tool through an ancient process that no factory could improve upon. In the city, you never thought about where things came from, what it took to make them. Out here, everything has a visible cost. Everything connects directly to life or death. Your last thought before sleep claims you is a strange realization. For the first time since arriving in this brutal wilderness, you feel something close to belonging. Not comfort, never that, but purpose, understanding. And the first faint echo of the knowledge that has kept mountain men alive in a land that wants them dead. Dawn brings a new sound that makes your blood run cold, cracking, shifting, the deep, ominous groan of ice moving against ice. Bill is already up, standing at the edge of your camp, looking toward the river with an expression you've learned to dread. What's happening? You ask, rolling stiffly out of your bedroll, the new buckskin clothing having kept you noticeably warmer through the night. Spring melt coming down from the high country, Bill says, nodding toward the sound. Rivers rising. You join him at the edge of the clearing. The river that yesterday was merely threatening is now genuinely terrifying. Swollen with snowmelt, it's at least 2 feet higher than the day before. The current has accelerated, carrying chunks of ice and entire trees ripped from upstream banks. "What about the traps?" you ask, already knowing the answer. Bill spits. "Gone, or soon will be." "All of them?" The dismay in your voice is clear. 2 days of work and valuable equipment just lost. "Part of the cost," Bill shrugs, though you can see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Traps were expensive, about $2 to $3 each in 1831. That's $60–90 in today's money, each, and you'd set 5. "We need to cross," Bill says, after a long moment of staring at the water. You look at him like he's lost his mind. "Cross? That?" The river is at least 40 yards wide, running fast and violent, carrying debris that could easily kill a man. Swimming is suicide. "Need to check the other bank," Bill explains. "This side's getting trapped out, and we need to get ahead of that water. It'll flood this whole bottom by tomorrow." You stare at the raging water. How exactly are we supposed to cross that? For the first time since you've met him, Bill almost smiles. "We build a boat." "A boat," you repeat flatly. "Out here. With what?" Bill gestures to the forest around you. "With that, like the old-timers did." Mountain men were masters of improvisation. If they needed something, they made it from whatever was available. This is probably the most important survival skill of all. Not specific techniques, but the mindset that looks at a problem and figures out a solution using only what's at hand. "What kind of boat?" you ask, already mentally cataloguing the tools you have between you. "Bull boat," Bill answers. "Simple. Works. Used to be made with buffalo hide, but deer'll do in a pinch." You follow Bill back to your camp, where he dumps out his pack and begins sorting through his possessions. He pulls out an axe head, not mounted on a handle, just the metal head to save weight, and a coil of rawhide cord. "First, we need the right wood," he says, lashing the axe head to a stout branch he cuts with his knife. Primitive, but effective. The next 2 hours are spent gathering materials. Bill sends you to cut willow branches, long, flexible ones at least an inch thick at the base. Meanwhile, he heads deeper into the forest, returning with several straight pine saplings about 2 inches in diameter. "Willows for the frame, pine for support," he explains, dropping his load at the camp. "I checked with a wilderness survival instructor about bull boats. They were incredibly practical," he told me. "The design was borrowed from Native American craft, particularly Plains tribes, essentially a round coracle made with a wooden framework covered in hide. They weren't meant for long journeys, just crossing rivers or temporary use." Under Bill's direction, you help bend the willow branches into a rough circle about 7 feet in diameter. The ends are overlapped and lashed together with rawhide. More willows are bent across this circle, creating a basket-like framework. "Now the cross braces," Bill says, cutting the pine saplings to the right length and lashing them across the willow frame for rigidity. The work is faster with 2 people, one holding while the other ties. By midday, you have a sturdy circular frame that looks like an enormous shallow basket. "Now for the covering," Bill says, opening his pack again. He pulls out another deer hide, larger than the one used for your buckskin clothing and still with the hair on. "Always carry a spare hide," he explains, seeing your surprise. "Too useful to be without." The hide is still somewhat stiff but workable. Bill shows you how to stretch it over the frame, hair side down. Want the smooth side out, he explains. Less drag in the water. The hide barely covers the frame, its edges just reaching around to the bottom. Bill uses an awl to punch holes along the edge of the hide, then threads raw hide through, lashing it tightly to the frame. Needs to be waterproof, he explains, working methodically around the circle. Any gap and we sink. Once the hide is secured, Bill produces a small pot of rendered animal fat from his pack. Bear grease, he says, makes it waterproof. Together, you coat the outer surface of the bull boat with the grease, paying special attention to the seams where the hide is lashed to the frame. Ain't pretty, Bill acknowledges when you finish, but it'll float. The boat looks primitive, almost comically so, a round, shallow basin about 7 feet across and maybe 2 feet deep. It resembles nothing so much as a giant hide-covered saucer. How do we steer it, you ask, circling the craft skeptically. You don't, exactly, Bill admits. Come on, more like Gaimonti with what? I don't see any oars. Bill picks up a straight branch about 5 feet long, with this or your hands if needed. You look from the stick to the raging river and back again. You can't be serious. Dead serious, Bill says. Bull boats have crossed every river in the West. Not elegant, but they work. You help Bill carry the bull boat to the river's edge. Up close, the water is even more intimidating. Brown with silt, carrying all manner of debris, it moves with a power that makes your knees weak. We'll put in above that bend, Bill says, pointing upstream. Current will push us across and down. We aim to land there. He points to a spot on the far bank about a quarter-mile downstream. What about our gear, you ask? Most stays here, Bill says. We cross, scout the other side, then come back for it. Boat can't hold everything. That makes you feel marginally better. At least when this thing sinks, you won't lose everything you own. Bill places his rifle, powder horn, and possible bag in the center of the bull boat, covering them with an oilcloth. You do the same with your weapon. If it goes over, let it go, Bill instructs, seriously. Gear can be replaced. You can't. With everything secured, Bill demonstrates how to get into the craft. It's trickier than it looks. The bull boat has no keel, nothing to keep it stable or upright. It shifts and wobbles with every movement. Low center of gravity, Bill advises, kneeling in the bottom rather than sitting. Keep weight in the middle. You follow his example, kneeling opposite him in the round craft. Even with just the two of you and minimal gear, the bull boat sits low in the water, its rim only about 6 inches above the surface. Ready? Bill asks, using the stick to push away from the bank. No. Not even remotely, but you nod anyway. The current grabs the bull boat immediately, spinning it like a leaf in a gutter. Bill digs his stick into the water, attempting to guide your direction more than actually propel the craft. Use your stick, he shouts over the rush of water. Other side. You plunge your branch into the river, feeling the incredible force of the current try to tear it from your grasp. Together, you and Bill perform an awkward paddling dance, each trying to counter the spin of the boat while also angling it toward the far shore. Water splashes over the edge with every wave and movement, beginning to pool at your knees. The bull boat is floating, but just barely. Keep bailing, Bill orders, and you realize he's been using his free hand to scoop water out of the boat. You do the same, alternating between paddling and bailing as the river carries you downstream at alarming speed. The banks blur past, trees and rocks mere smears of color in your peripheral vision. Something slams into the side of your craft, a submerged log or rock, sending it into a frenzied spin. Water pours in over one side. Shift your weight, Bill barks, already moving to the high side. You scramble to follow, nearly capsizing the boat in the opposite direction before finding a precarious balance. More water has entered, now nearly covering the bottom completely. Bail faster. You abandon any pretense of steering, focusing entirely on scooping water out as quickly as possible. Your arms burn with the effort, hands numb from the frigid river. The far bank is approaching fast, too fast. At your current speed, you'll slam into it rather than gently beach. Back paddle, Bill shouts, driving his stick into the water against the direction of travel. You follow suit, straining against the current. The bullboat slows marginally, still spinning but with slightly less velocity. 50 yards from shore, you hit another obstacle. This time, the impact is enough to throw you forward onto your hands and knees, sending a wave of water into the craft. "We're going over," Bill yells, already grabbing his rifle and possible bag. The bullboat tilts dangerously, one edge dipping below the surface. Water pours in. In seconds, you're floating in a hide bathtub filled with river water. "Abandon," Bill commands, rolling over the side into the river. You clutch your rifle and follow, the shocking cold of the water stealing your breath. The current immediately grabs you, pulling you downstream as the waterlogged bullboat capsizes completely behind you. The river is deep, over your head in places, forcing you to swim one-armed while keeping your rifle above water. The current tosses you like a toy, spinning you so that you lose all sense of direction. A branch slams into your back, knocking what little air remains from your lungs. You gasp, swallowing water, panic rising as your head goes under. Then your feet hit something solid, a sandbar. You push up, breaking the surface, coughing and sputtering. The water here is only chest deep, allowing you to wade rather than swim. "This way," Bill's voice calls from ahead. You spot him closer to shore, fighting through waist-deep water toward a small cove where the current slackens. You follow, each step a battle against the flow, trying to sweep your feet out from under you. Finally, you stagger onto the shore, collapsing on the rocky bank. Your rifle, miraculously, is still in your grasp, though thoroughly soaked. Your powder will be useless until dried. "Boat's gone," Bill states the obvious, watching the remains of your craft disappear around a bend downstream. "That was your plan," you gasp when you can speak again. "That death trap?" Bill shrugs, already wringing water from his buckskin shirt. "Got us across, didn't it?" You want to argue, but he's not wrong. Despite the terrifying journey and ultimate destruction of the bullboat, you have indeed reached the far shore. "Would have worked better in calmer water," Bill admits. "But we didn't have calm water. That's the reality of frontier life right there. You use what you have, not what you wish you had. Perfect solutions are a luxury of civilization. The next hour is spent recovering, drying your weapons as best you can, wringing out clothes and assessing your situation. The buckskin clothing, though soaked, has performed surprisingly well. It hasn't become heavy and cumbersome like wool or cottonwood. "We'll need fire," Bill decides, looking at the western sky where clouds are gathering again, temperatures dropping. You help gather wood, your hands still shaking from cold and adrenaline. Bill uses the flint and steel from his possible bag, thankfully waterproofed in oilcloth, to spark a flame. Within minutes, a small fire burns on the shore. "Strip," Bill orders, already removing his clothes to dry them by the fire. In the city, you die of embarrassment. Out here, you comply without hesitation. Modesty means nothing compared to avoiding freezing to death in wet clothing. As your clothes steam by the fire, Bill surveys the new territory you've reached. The far bank is steeper, more wooded, with less evidence of human presence. "Better trapping here," he observes, scanning the shoreline. See those trees? He points to several aspens and cottonwoods with trunks gnawed at the base. Beaver sign, fresh, good-size colony nearby. Despite the harrowing river crossing, you feel a surge of something like excitement. This is why you came west, after all. For opportunity, for beaver, for profit. How do we get back, you ask, suddenly remembering all your gear on the other shore. We don't, Bill says simply. Not today, maybe not for weeks. You stare at him. But our supplies... Trap here first, Bill cuts you off. Work this bank until we have enough pelts to make the crossing worthwhile. River might be lower by then. And if it's not, Bill shrugs. Build another boat, better one, with more time. The casual acceptance of this setback is perhaps the most important lesson you've learned so far. Plans change, nature intervenes, adapt or die. Can we build a proper shelter, you ask, eyeing the darkening sky. Bill nods. Need to move away from the river first. Find higher ground before this bank floods too. Once your clothes are merely damp rather than soaking, you dress and help Bill extinguish the fire. With minimal gear and no food except Bill's small emergency rations, you follow him up a game trail leading away from the river. Half a mile inland, the terrain rises to a small ridge covered with pines. Bill chooses a spot on the leeward side, protected from the prevailing wind. Here, he decides, good drainage, shelter from weather, close enough to water but safe from flooding. The shelter you build is more substantial than the previous night's wickie-up. With more time and the immediate threat of the river receding, Bill shows you how to construct a lean-to using fallen timber for the main support and pine boughs for the roof and sides. Angled to reflect fire heat, he explains, building a long, narrow fire pit parallel to the open side of the shelter. By nightfall, you have a surprisingly comfortable camp established. The lean-to is large enough for both of you to stretch out, with the fire providing a wall of heat that reflects off the sloped roof. Tomorrow we make new traps, Bill says as darkness falls. Can't replace the iron ones, but we can make deadfalls. Deadfalls, you ask. Log traps, primitive, but they work. Indians used them before white men brought steel. The thought of starting from scratch is daunting, but there's also a strange pride in the knowledge that you can, that you're not helpless without manufactured tools, with no food except a small piece of jerky each from Bill's emergency supply. You go to bed hungry, but the shelter is warm, the fire crackling comfortingly, and exhaustion soon pulls you towards sleep. Bill, you say as your eyes grow heavy, why do mountain men use bull boats instead of, I don't know, real boats, canoes or something? Bill shifts in his bedroll. Wait, he answers simply. Can't carry a canoe over mountains. Bull boat you build when needed. Use it. Leave it. Build another somewhere else. The perfect tool for men who travel light and adapt to their surroundings rather than trying to bring civilization with them. Would have worked better if the river wasn't flooding, you observe drowsily. Usually does, Bill agrees, but usually gets men killed out here. As you drift towards sleep, you realize that's perhaps the most important lesson of the day. There is no usually in the wilderness. No guarantees, just skills, judgment, and the willingness to risk everything on a hide-covered frame of sticks when the river needs crossing. The sound of the rushing water follows you into your dreams, where you're endlessly spinning in a bullboat that never quite sinks and never reaches shore, always in between, always at the mercy of forces beyond your control, just like real life on the frontier. Morning comes with the distant rumble of thunder. Your body is a catalogue of complaints, muscles stiff from yesterday's swim, skin chafed from damp buckskin, stomach hollow with hunger, but you're alive, which counts for something out here. Bill is already up, as usual, standing at the edge of the ridge, staring out at the landscape with practiced eyes. Storm coming, he says as you join him. 2, maybe 3 hours away. You scan the horizon. The sky looks mostly clear to you, with just a faint darkening to the west. How can you tell? Birds, he says, pointing to a flock moving eastward. They know. So do I. You've noticed this about Bill, and presumably about all mountain men who survived more than one season. They don't just see nature, they read it like a language written in wind patterns, animal behavior, cloud formations. What's the plan, you ask, your empty stomach answering for you with an audible growl. Food first, Bill says, then navigation. He leads you down the ridge toward a small creek feeding into the main river. The water runs clear here, unlike the muddy torrent you crossed yesterday. Watch, Bill says, stopping at the creek's edge. He stands motionless, eyes fixed on the water. You wait, struggling to match his patience, unsure what exactly you're watching for. Then Bill moves, a blur of speed so sudden it startles you. His hands plunge into the water and emerge holding a thrashing trout about a foot long. Breakfast, he announces, tossing the fish onto the bank. Holy shit, did he just catch a fish with his bare hands? How did you start? Patience, Bill cuts you off. Seeing where they hold in the current, quick hands, he makes it sound so simple, like anyone could do it. Your turn, he says, stepping back from the creek. Right, because of course he expects you to catch a fish with your bare hands now. You kneel where Bill stood, studying the water. It's clear but moving swiftly, flowing over and around rocks. You can see small fish darting in the current, but they seem impossible to catch. Look for the bigger ones, Bill advises. They hold behind rocks, out of the main current. Wait for them to stop moving. You focus, trying to see what he sees. The minutes stretch out, your knees getting damp from the creek bank. Just as you're about to give up, you spot it, a larger shadow, mostly still, hovering behind a submerged boulder. Without thinking, you lunge. Your hands hit cold water, close around something solid and squirming, then nothing. The fish slips through your fingers and darts away. Almost, Bill says, and coming from him, it's practically a compliment. Again. It takes 3 more attempts before you succeed. Your hands finally close around a trout, smaller than Bill's, but definitely a meal, and you manage to fling it onto the bank before it can wriggle free. Got one, you exclaim, more excited than you've been in days. Bill nods. That's how it's done. Not fancy, just works. Within the hour, you've cleaned the fish and cooked them over a small fire. No seasonings except a pinch of salt from Bill's supply, but it's still the best meal you can remember eating. Amazing how hunger changes your standards. After breakfast, Bill shifts focus. Need to know where we are, he says, leading you back to the ridge. And where we're going. Don't you have a map? You ask. Bill gives you a look. Paper maps out here? Useless. Rivers change course. Landmarks burn or fall. Man who trusts a paper map is a man who'll die lost. So how do mountain men navigate? Not with compasses and sextants like sailors, and certainly not with the detailed survey maps that wouldn't exist for decades. The rivers are our roads, Bill explains, gesturing toward the main waterway visible below your ridge. Learn them, you can travel anywhere. He points west toward the mountains. That river comes from there. 3 major forks above us. South Fork rises near Spanish lands. Middle Fork has the best beaver, but worst Blackfeet trouble. North Fork is mineral springs and poor trapping. This entire geography lesson is coming straight from his head. No paper, no compass, just knowledge accumulated through experience and shared among mountain men at their yearly rendezvous. How do you remember it all? You ask, genuinely impressed. Bill taps his temple. Man who forgets dies. Simple as that. He leads you back down to the river, to a spot where a fallen tree provides a natural overlook of the water. River tells you everything you need to know, he begins, pointing to the water. Color tells you what's upstream. Clear water means rock. Brown means soil, could be recent rain or snowmelt. White water means obstacles. I looked into this. Mountain men really did read rivers this way. The colour and turbidity of water gave them critical information about conditions upstream, which could make the difference between safe travel and disaster. Bill points to a spot where the current forms small standing waves. See how water humps there? Submerged rock or log. Dangerous. He indicates another area where the water forms small whirlpools. Deep spot there. Good fishing, but dangerous swimming. The river is suddenly transformed before your eyes, no longer just water flowing downhill, but a complex map of information, revealing depths, hazards, fishing spots, animal crossings, and travel routes. What about direction, you ask? How do you know which way is which without a compass? Bill points up. Sun rises east, sets west, always. And at night, or when it's cloudy, stars, he says simply. North Star doesn't move. Rest of the sky turns around it. He shows you how to find Polaris, the North Star, by using the pointer stars in the Big Dipper. Find that. You always know north, he says. South is behind you. East right, west left. What if you can't see the stars either? You press. Cloudy night? Then you pay attention during daylight, Bill says with mild irritation. Note landmarks. Remember where water flows, always downhill. Moss grows thicker on the north side of trees. I've heard that's not always true, you interject, remembering something from a book. Bill gives you a withering look. Books tell you what always happens. I'm telling you what works most times. Difference between knowledge and wisdom. He leads you further along the river, moving upstream. You notice he's studying the banks carefully, stopping occasionally to examine tracks in the mud or broken twigs. Or reading sign, he explains when he catches your questioning look. Everything leaves traces. Beaver, elk, wolf, man. Learn to see what's written on the land. He points to a muddy patch near the water. Deer, 2 of them, doe and yearling, came to drink at dawn today. You see the tracks, but you'd never have known how many deer, their ages, or when they passed. How can you tell it was dawn? You ask. Bill points to the track edge. Still sharp. If they came yesterday, overnight frost would have softened the edges. No frost yet when they passed. Means dawn. This level of observation seems superhuman to you, but it's just the baseline skill for survival in the wilderness. Anyone less observant was already dead. As you continue upriver, Bill suddenly freezes, raising a hand for you to stop. He drops into a crouch, motioning you to do the same. What? You whisper, scanning for danger. Bill points silently across the river to a small clearing. At first you see nothing, then movement. A massive brown form emerges from the trees. Bear, grizzly bear, and not just any grizzly. The biggest animal you've ever seen in your life. Don't move, Bill breathes, barely audible. Wind's in our favour. He doesn't know we're here. The bear ambles to the river's edge, seemingly unconcerned with anything but the water. It dips its enormous head to drink, then straightens and appears to scan the opposite bank. If he swims across, Bill whispers. What do we do? You whisper back, heart hammering in your chest. Hope our rifles still work after yesterday's swim. I researched grisly encounters with mountain men. They were terrifyingly common. A single swipe from a grizzly could decapitate a man. Their hides could absorb multiple musket balls without stopping the bear's charge. They were the apex predator of the Rocky Mountains, and mountain men respected them accordingly. For long minutes, you remain frozen, watching the bear move along the far bank. Finally, to your immense relief, it turns and disappears back into the forest. That, Bill says as he straightens, is why you always know what's around you, always have an escape route, always have your weapon ready. Have you ever had to shoot one? You ask, still trembling slightly. Bill nods grimly. Twice, never by choice. You continue upstream, but with a new awareness of your surroundings. That bear is still out there, maybe watching you even now. The wilderness suddenly feels more alive, more dangerous. After about 2 miles of hiking along the riverbank, Bill stops at a spot where a small tributary feeds into the main river. Good beaver spot, he declares, examining the muddy banks and nearby trees. Clear sign. You see what he's seeing now, the distinctive gnaw marks on aspen trunks. The slides where beaver have dragged branches to the water, even a partially constructed dam across the smaller stream. No iron traps, you remind him. Don't need 'em, Bill says, going to make deadfalls instead. He leads you into the woods to find materials. Over the next 2 hours, he demonstrates how to build a primitive beaver trap using only what the forest provides. It's essentially a heavy log positioned to fall on the animal when it triggers a release mechanism. Not as reliable as steel traps, Bill admits as you finish setting the first one, but they work. Indians trapped beaver for generations before white men came. You help construct and set 5 more deadfalls in locations Bill identifies as likely beaver paths. The work is time-consuming but satisfying in a primal way. You're creating something functional using only natural materials and knowledge. As you finish the last trap, the sky has darkened considerably. The storm Bill predicted is approaching fast, clouds building into towering grey masses. Need shelter, Bill says, eyeing the sky. Proper one this time. Could be here a while. He leads you to a spot about 100 yards from the river on slightly elevated ground with good tree cover. This'll be our main camp, he decides, close to water and trapping, high enough to avoid flooding, sheltered from wind. What follows is a lesson in frontier architecture. Unlike the temporary wiki-up or lean-to of previous nights, Bill intends to build something more substantial. Half-faced camp, he explains. Good for longer stays. The structure starts with 2 trees about 10 feet apart. A stout pole is lashed between them at about 6 feet high, creating a ridgepole. From this, smaller poles are angled down to the ground, forming a sloped roof frame. Steeper angle than a lean-to, Bill explains. Sheds rain better. You gather pine boughs while Bill constructs a lattice of branches across the roof frame. The boughs are layered over this lattice, starting from the bottom and working up, creating a surprisingly effective roof. The front of the shelter remains open, while the sides and back are closed in with more branches and boughs. The result is a 3-sided structure with the open face positioned away from the prevailing wind. Fire goes here, Bill says, creating a fire pit a few feet from the open side. Heat reflects off the roof, keeps the inside warm. By the time the first raindrops fall, you have a shelter that feels almost luxurious compared to previous nights. The space inside is large enough for both of you to sit upright, with room for your minimal gear and enough space to sleep without touching. The rain comes suddenly. Not a gentle build-up, but an immediate deluge, hammering down with tropical intensity. Wind drives it sideways, but your shelter, positioned correctly, remains mostly dry inside. From your protected vantage point, you watch the storm lash the forest. Lightning flashes, thunder booms overhead, and the world becomes a chaotic swirl of water and wind. "This is why we moved away from the river," Bill comments, nodding toward the direction of the main waterway. "Flash floods in this country can rise 20 feet in minutes. The thought of being caught in such a flood makes your stomach tighten. So many ways to die out here, each requiring different knowledge to avoid. As the storm rages, Bill continues your education." "River's the key to everything," he says, whittling a piece of wood by the small fire you've managed to keep going inside your shelter. Knowing where it goes, what connects to what. He uses his knife to scratch a crude map in the dirt floor of your shelter. "We're here," he says, marking a spot. "River flows east, eventually joins the Missouri. Follow it west instead. It leads to the high passes." His knife traces the watercourse, adding tributaries and landmarks. "This creek we're on joins 2 miles upstream. Follow it north 3 days. You hit hot springs, good wintering spot." The map expands as he talks, not just showing physical features, but adding layers of information. "Blackfeet hunt here in summer." He marks an area. "Avoid. Crow territory here, friendlier to trappers, but watch your horses. Sioux over here, depends on the band whether they'll trade or take your scalp." It strikes you that Bill carries this entire complex geography in his head, not just the physical terrain, but the human terrain as well, the invisible boundaries between tribal territories, the seasonal movements of both animals and people, the safe routes and danger zones. "How do you remember all this?" you ask again, genuinely astonished. Bill looks up from his whittling. "Same way you remember the streets in St. Louis. You live here long enough, it becomes part of you." The rain continues through the afternoon and into evening. You venture out only briefly to check that the rising water hasn't reached your camp and to gather more firewood from under fallen logs where it's stayed dry. By nightfall, you've settled into an almost comfortable routine in your new shelter. The fire keeps the space warm despite the dropping temperature outside. Bill teaches you how to make pine needle tea, not delicious but hot and containing vitamin C that helps prevent scurvy. "Tomorrow we check the dead falls," Bill says as darkness envelops the forest outside. "If we're lucky, we'll have beaver for breakfast. And if we're not, you ask?" "More fish," Bill shrugs. "Or maybe grouse. Saw sign of them nearby." The adaptability still amazes you. No store, no supplies, just knowledge of what the land provides and how to take it. "Bill," you say after a comfortable silence, "why did you agree to take me on? I know the company assigned you to show me the ropes, but you could have said no." Bill continues whittling for a long moment before answering. "Trapping's dying," he finally says. "More men coming west every year, fewer beaver left. Hudson's Bay Company poisoning streams up north to keep Americans out. Silk hats becoming fashionable back east instead of beaver." He tests the edge of his knife with his thumb. "Few more years, this life will be gone. Thought someone ought to remember how it was done." The admission surprises you. It's the most Bill has shared about his thoughts or motivations since you met him. "So you're teaching me so I can tell others?" you ask. Bill snorts. "I'm teaching you so you don't die before summer. What you do with the knowledge after that ain't my concern." But you sense there's more to it. A recognition that the era of the mountain man is fading, that the incredible skills and knowledge they accumulated might disappear with them. Outside, the storm begins to ease, the hammering rain softening to a gentle patter. The thunder moves away, rumbling in the distance rather than directly overhead. "Get some sleep," Bill says, settling onto his bedroll. "Dawn comes early." You lie back on your own bedding, listening to the rain on the pine bough roof. Despite the hardships, despite the dangers, there's a growing part of you that understands why men like Bill choose this life. The freedom, the self-reliance, the direct connection to the land and its rhythms. As you drift towards sleep, you realize you haven't thought about St. Louis in days, haven't missed your soft bed or cooked meals or clean clothes. Your world has narrowed to immediate concerns: food, shelter, safety, yet somehow expanded to include an entire mountain range, its rivers and creatures, its dangers and opportunities. Bill's right. The maps that matter can't be drawn on paper. They exist in the mind, constantly updated with new information, alive in a way no printed chart could be. And slowly, day by day, you're beginning to create your own map of this wild country. Not detailed enough to survive on your own, not yet, but it's a start. Dawn brings a steady drizzle and bone-deep cold that seeps through your buckskin clothing. The rain continued all night, sometimes easing to a mist, sometimes hammering down in sheets driven by wind. The half-faced shelter held up remarkably well, keeping you mostly dry, though the dampness in the air made sleep fitful and uncomfortable. Bill is already moving around outside, seemingly unbothered by the wet or cold. Mountain men operated regardless of weather. They had to. Nature doesn't offer sick days. Deadfalls, he calls to you, not waiting to see if you follow. You roll stiffly from your bedroll, every muscle protesting. The fire you maintained through most of the night has burned to embers, providing little warmth now. You add the last of your dry wood, knowing you'll need to find more soon. Outside, the world is sodden. Water drips from every branch, puddles stand in every depression, and the sky remains a uniform grey, promising more rain to come. The forest smells different in this weather, more intense somehow, the sense of pine, wet earth, and rotting leaves amplified by the moisture. You follow Bill through the wet underbrush, your buckskins quickly becoming soaked from brushing against waterlogged plants. Despite the discomfort, you notice the clothing still performs better than cotton would. It doesn't become heavy and cloying and somehow still provides some warmth despite being wet. The first 4 deadfalls you check are empty or sprung without catching anything. Bill seems unsurprised, resetting them with minor adjustments to increase their effectiveness. The 5th, however, holds a prize. Got one, Bill says with quiet satisfaction, examining the trap. A medium-sized beaver lies beneath the deadfall log, the weight having killed it instantly. The fur looks rich and full, a prime pelt worth good money. Carry it back to camp, Bill instructs, already moving to check the final trap. The beaver is heavier than it looks, maybe 20 pounds of muscle and fat. You hoist it over your shoulder, its wet fur immediately soaking through your shirt. The last deadfall is also empty, but Bill pauses there, examining the ground with unusual intensity. What is it, you ask? He points to the mud nearby. Someone's been here. You look where he's pointing, but see nothing unusual. There, Bill says, indicating what looks to me like just another patch of muddy ground. Moccasin print, not old. Now that he's pointed it out, you can just barely make out what might be the impression of a foot, but it's so faint, so easily overlooked that you're amazed he spotted it at all. Black feet? You ask, immediately scanning the surrounding forest. Bill shakes his head. Crow, by the pattern, less likely to kill us on sight, but they'll still take what they can. How far? Your grip tightens on the beaver carcass, a valuable prize you're suddenly reluctant to surrender. Hard to tell in this rain, tracks wash out quick. Bill straightens, eyes continuing to scan the surrounding forest. Let's get back to camp. Stay alert. The return trip feels different, charged with tension. Every shadow might hide watchers. Every sound could signal danger. You find yourself walking more quietly, placing your feet more carefully, mimicking Bill's movements without conscious thought. At camp, Bill immediately starts reinforcing the shelter, adding brush to the sides to better conceal it from casual observation. Need to smoke the fire, he explains as he works. Less visible that way. While he finishes the shelter improvements, you set to work processing the beaver. The skinning process is becoming more familiar now, your hands remembering the motions Bill taught you. You're careful to preserve the valuable castor glands. They'll be needed to bait more traps. With the pelt removed and stretched on a frame improvised from branches, you turn to the meat. Beaver flesh is dark, rich with fat that will be invaluable for the calories it provides. You cut steaks from the hindquarters as Bill taught you, setting aside the flat, paddle-like tail for special treatment. When Bill returns, he nods approval at your work. Fire's gone, he notes, looking at the cold ashes where your morning fire had been. Used the last of the dry wood, you explain. Everything else is soaked. Bill grunts. Time you learned proper fire making then. Most important skill out here. You've made fires before, of course. In St. Louis, with properly dried wood, newspaper and matches, it was simple. Even your first nights on the trail, Bill had handled the fire making, always seeming to produce flame with minimal effort despite conditions. Thought we'd need to find dry wood first, you say, looking doubtfully at the sodden forest around you. Wood's everywhere, Bill says. Dry tinder is what matters, and knowing how to use what you have. He kneels by the cold fire pit and opens his possible bag. From it, he removes a small leather pouch, a piece of oddly shaped steel, and a grey stone about the size of his thumb. Flint and steel, he explains, holding up the items. Never leave camp without them. You'd seen him use these before, but never paid close attention to the process. Now, with the rain continuing and the temperature dropping, the ability to make fire feels suddenly critically important. This, Bill holds up the stone, is flint, hard stone that makes sparks when struck right. Not actually flint, it's chert, but everyone calls it flint out here. He shows you the steel striker next, a C-shaped piece of high-carbon steel with a handle portion. Striker, angle matters, technique matters. I spent time with a wilderness survival instructor learning this process. Modern people think of flint and steel as primitive, he told me. But it was high technology for its time. The steel had to be precisely the right carbon content. The technique had to be exactly right. It was the difference between life and death in cold, wet conditions. Bill continues removing items from his fire kit. A small tin appears, which he opens to reveal what looks like blackened cloth scraps. Char cloth, he explains. Most important part, cotton or linen cloth that's been partially burned in the absence of oxygen, catches sparks, holds an ember. The process seems more complicated than you expected, not just striking steel on stone, but a whole system of specialized materials. Always keep charcloth dry, Bill emphasizes, showing how his tin is sealed against moisture. No charcloth, no fire. Simple as that. Next, he pulls out a small bundle of what looks like dried grass and shredded bark. Tinder bundle. Collect material whenever you find good stuff. Keep some in an oilskin for emergencies. You watch as Bill arranges his materials. He places a small piece of the charcloth on top of the flint, holding both in his left hand. With his right, he grips the steel striker. Watch close, he instructs. Angle matters, not hitting the flint, scraping steel across it. Spark needs to land on the charcloth. With a quick, practiced motion, he drags the edge of the steel striker down across the flint. A small shower of sparks flies, and one lands on the char cloth. Instead of going out, it catches, creating a tiny glowing ember in the black material. "Got it," Bill says with satisfaction. "Now the delicate part." He carefully folds the char cloth around the ember and places it into the center of his tinder bundle, the nest of dried grass and bark. Then he brings the bundle to his face and begins to blow, gently at first, then with increasing pressure as the ember grows. "Too hard, you blow it out," he explains between breaths. "Too soft, it dies. Just right," and a tendril of smoke rises from the bundle, then another. With continued careful breathing, a small flame suddenly appears among the fibers. Bill immediately transfers the nascent flame to the fire pit, adding the smallest, driest twigs he can find from the protected interior of your shelter. "Fire's a living thing," Bill says as he nurtures the tiny flames. "Needs to breathe, needs to eat, needs to be protected when it's young." The flame catches on the twigs, growing cautiously. Bill adds slightly larger pieces, arranging them to allow airflow while protecting the young fire from the damp air. "Your turn," he says, extinguishing the small fire by covering it with dirt. "Everyone should be able to do this 3 times, at least, in the rain when your hands are cold." The pressure is immediate and intense. Fire isn't just comfort out here, it's life, especially now with the temperature dropping and your clothes damp. The ability to create heat could determine whether you survive the night. Bill hands you the flint, steel, and char cloth, then steps back to observe. Your first attempts are clumsy. You can't seem to get the angle right, and the few sparks you manage to create miss the char cloth entirely. Your hands, cold and slightly shaking from both the temperature and the pressure, don't help. "Relax," Bill advises. "Breathe. Steady hands make fire. Panic kills it." You take a deep breath, adjust your grip, and try again. This time, a spark lands on the char cloth, creating a tiny red glow. "Good," Bill nods. "Now don't waste it. Transfer to your tinder." This proves even harder than creating the spark. You try to move the cloth too quickly, and the tiny ember goes out before it can be transferred. Again, Bill says simply. It takes 5 more attempts before you successfully create a spark, transfer it to the tinder bundle, and blow it into flame. By then, your hands are numb from cold, and frustration has nearly overwhelmed you several times. But when the flame finally catches, the surge of accomplishment is unlike anything you've experienced. "I did it," you breathe, watching the small flame dance in your hands. Bill nods. "Now you know how to live. Do it again." And so he makes you repeat the process. Twice more you create fire from scratch, each time getting slightly more efficient, slightly more confident in the movements. By the 3rd successful flame, you understand why Bill insisted on repetition. The knowledge is moving from your brain to your muscles, becoming instinct rather than conscious thought. With a real fire finally established in the pit, Bill shows you the next challenge, finding dry wood in a soaked forest. "Standing dead wood," he explains, leading you to a grey, branchless tree trunk that died years ago but remains upright. Outside's wet, but inside, he splits a section with his axe, revealing dry wood at the core. Still good, he teaches you to look for fallen logs that sit up off the ground, to check under rock overhangs where wood might be sheltered, to split larger pieces to access the dry interior. "Always be collecting," he advises. "See good fire material, take it. Never know when you'll need it." Back at camp with an adequate wood supply, Bill demonstrates another fire technique, banking coals. He shows how to create a thick layer of ash that insulates burning coals beneath, keeping them alive for hours without flame. Do this at night, he explains. In the morning, you have ready coals, no need to start from scratch. As evening approaches, the rain finally stops, though the clouds remain. You've spent the day learning fire skills, processing the beaver, and reinforcing your camp. The beaver steaks cook on sticks beside the fire, the rich smell making your mouth water after days of minimal food. This is the most important lesson, Bill says as darkness gathers around your camp. No fire, no life. Simple as that. The firelight creates a small circle of warmth and safety in the vast wilderness. Outside that circle, unseen predators move through the gathering dark. Wolves, bears, mountain lions, and possibly humans, more dangerous than any animal. Fire kept our first ancestors alive, Bill continues, turning the beaver meat to cook the other side. Nothing's changed. Man without fire is just slow meat for something faster and hungrier. You think about how many times you've taken fire for granted. Stoves, fireplaces, matches. Out here, it's a skill to be mastered, a treasure to be guarded. The beaver meat proves delicious, rich and dark, somewhat like beef, but with a distinct flavour all its own. The tail, roasted directly in the coals until the scaly skin can be peeled away, is almost entirely fat, a caloric goldmine in this environment where every bit of energy is precious. After eating, both of you clean your hands in wet sand from the riverbank. Another frontier trick. No soap, but the sand scours away blood and grease effectively. With full bellies and a healthy fire, the evening takes on an almost comfortable quality, despite the persistent damp and chill. Bill uses the time to work on the beaver pelt, scraping it further and adjusting its position on the stretching frame. 20 pelts like this, he says, examining the fur quality, and we can think about heading for Rendezvous. Rendezvous, the legendary summer gathering of mountain men, where a year's worth of pelts were traded for supplies, news was exchanged, and hard-earned money was often spent on whiskey and gambling within days. For many trappers, it was the only human contact they had outside their small trapping partnerships. Where's Rendezvous this year, you ask? Green River, Bill answers. If we make good time, we should hit it by July. July, months away. The realization of how long you'll be out here settles over you. Not days or weeks, but a full trapping season. Spring is just beginning, and you won't see civilization again until midsummer. How long have you been out this time, you ask? Bill considers. Left Rendezvous last August. Been in the mountains since. He shrugs. Lost track of exact days. Don't matter much out here. 8 months at least, with no contact with the outside world except when the fur company agent dropped you into his unwilling care a few weeks ago. No wonder Bill seems more comfortable with silence than conversation. He spent most of a year with only the wilderness for company. As night deepens, you take turns keeping the fire fed. Sleep comes easier tonight, your body exhausted from the day's activities, your mind calmer with the knowledge that you've mastered another essential skill. In the deepest part of the night, during your watch, you experiment again with the flint and steel. The movements feel more natural now, your hands remembering the correct angle, the right pressure. A spark catches the char cloth, and you nurture it carefully into a tiny flame. Creating fire from nothing but stone, metal, and knowledge feels like a form of magic. Not the showy, theatrical magic of city performers, but the deep, ancient magic of survival, of pushing back darkness and cold through skill and patience. Bill wakes and watches you silently for a moment. Getting better, he acknowledges, the closest thing to praise you've received. It's easier than I thought, you admit. Once you know how. Bill nods. Most important things are like that. Look impossible until you learn the trick. Then you wonder why everyone can't do it. A comfortable silence falls between you, broken only by the pop and crackle of the fire, the warmth, the food in your belly, the growing confidence in your abilities, all combine to create a moment of unexpected contentment in the midst of constant challenge. Bill, you ask after a while, what's the hardest part of this life, the thing most city men can't handle? He considers the question, staring into the flames. Loneliness, he finally answers. Not the cold or the work or the danger, those you get used to, but the silence. Being days from any other human voice, weeks from anyone who speaks your language. Some men go mad from it, but not you. A ghost of a smile touches his weathered face. Who says I didn't? It's the closest thing to a joke you've heard from him, and it startles a laugh from you. Get some sleep, Bill says, taking over the fire watch. Tomorrow we check the traps again, maybe set some more. You settle into your bedroll, watching the firelight play on the shelter's roof. The skills are coming, one by one. Fire, shelter, navigation, trapping. Slowly, the overwhelming wilderness is becoming slightly less overwhelming. Not safe, never that, but perhaps survivable. Outside, an owl calls into the darkness. The fire pops, sending sparks upward toward the unseen stars. Your last thought before sleep claims you is surprisingly clear. Civilization has its comforts, but there's something pure about this existence. Something that strips away everything but the essentials. Food, warmth, shelter, and the knowledge to secure all three. 4 days of steady trapping have passed. The rain has finally moved on, replaced by clear, cold mountain air that feels like it's cleaning your lungs with each breath. Your deadfalls have proven surprisingly effective. 7 beaver taken so far, their pelts stretched and drying on frames around your camp. Bill seems pleased, though he expresses it only through a slight reduction in criticism of your work. Dawn today brings something new, a different kind of urgency in Bill's movements as he checks the sky. What is it, you ask, emerging from the half-faced shelter where you've slept better each night as your body adapts to the hard ground? Weather's changing, Bill says, studying the eastern horizon. Warm spell coming. You glance at the frost-covered ground dubiously. Doesn't feel warm. Will be. 2-3 days. Snow'll melt in the high country. River'll rise again. Bill turns to you. Need to prepare. For what? Hunger. The blunt answer catches you off guard. You've been eating reasonably well. Beaver meat, a few fish, even a grouse Bill snared yesterday. The desperate hunger of your first days seems behind you. We have food, you point out. Bill shakes his head. Fresh meat spoils fast in warm weather, and game moves when water rises. Might be days with nothing to hunt. He begins gathering equipment. His knife, the small axe, a canvas bag. Today we make insurance, he announces. Pemmican. The word is familiar from books you've read about Western exploration. Lewis and Clark carried it. Voyageurs lived on it for months, but you've never seen it made, let alone tasted it. First, we need meat. Lots of it. Bill shoulders his rifle. Deer would be best. You follow him into the forest, moving quietly as he's taught you. The morning is bright, sunlight filtering through pine boughs to create dappled patterns on the forest floor. Birds call from the canopy, their songs more numerous and varied than in previous days, another sign of the coming change in weather. Bill leads you to a meadow about a mile from camp. Frost still covers the grass, glittering in the early light. At the meadow's edge, he drops to a crouch, motioning for you to do the same. "Wait," he whispers, settling against a fallen log with his rifle across his knees. The wait stretches from minutes to an hour. Your legs cramp. Your nose runs in the cold. But Bill remains perfectly still, barely seeming to breathe, his eyes fixed on the open ground before you. Just as you're about to whisper a complaint, movement catches your eye at the meadow's far edge. A deer, a good-sized buck with a modest rack of antlers, steps cautiously from the trees. It pauses, nose testing the air, ears swiveling to catch any sound of danger. Bill remains motionless, not even raising his rifle yet. The deer takes another step into the clearing, then another, gradually relaxing as it detects no threat. Finally, when the animal is fully in the open and presenting its broadside, Bill slowly, smoothly brings the rifle to his shoulder. The movement is so gradual, so natural, that it seems like part of the forest's gentle swaying in the light breeze. The shot, when it comes, shatters the morning silence. The buck drops instantly, struck through the heart, a clean kill that minimizes suffering and preserves meat quality. "Got him," Bill says simply, rising from his position. You help Bill Field dress the deer, removing the internal organs to cool the meat quickly and prevent spoilage. The process is messy but necessary, and you've grown somewhat accustomed to blood and viscera over the past weeks. Still, certain aspects remain challenging. "Save that," Bill instructs as you're about to discard the liver. "Good eating and that." He points to other organs, the heart, kidneys. In the wilderness, nothing edible is wasted. Together, you carry the dressed deer back to camp, a heavy, awkward burden that leaves you breathless and sweating despite the cool air. There, Bill immediately begins the next phase of processing. "Need to cut it up," he explains, his knife working with practiced efficiency to separate the deer into manageable portions. "Steaks will eat soon, the rest goes into pemmican." You watch as he cuts much of the meat into thin strips, maybe a 1/4 inch thick. "These need to dry," he explains, "completely. No moisture or it'll spoil." With your help, he constructs a drying rack, a simple frame of branches elevated about 4 feet off the ground. The meat strips are draped over the crosspieces, none touching, all exposed to air. "Good day for it," Bill notes, looking at the clear sky. "Sun and wind will do half the work." The remaining chore is fire, a larger one than usual, kept burning steadily to create smoke that helps preserve the meat and keeps flies away. You use your new fire-making skills with growing confidence, producing a flame on your second attempt with the flint and steel. "What now?" you ask, as the last strips of meat are arranged on the drying rack. "Now the fat," Bill says, turning to the deer carcass. He cuts away the fat deposits, particularly from around the kidneys and along the back. "Need to render it." He explains the process as he works. The fat must be cut into small pieces, then heated slowly to melt it without burning. The liquid fat is then strained to remove any meat particles or other impurities. "If it burns, it spoils," Bill warns, showing you how to manage the small fire under the rendering pot. Really just a small tin container he's carried in his pack specifically for this purpose. "Why go to all this trouble?" you ask, watching the fat slowly transform from solid white chunks to transparent liquid gold. "Why not just salt the meat like they do back east?" Bill gives you a look. "See any salt mines around here? Or oceans for making sea salt? Out here, you use what's available and what works." The fat rendering takes hours, requiring constant attention to maintain the perfect low heat. Meanwhile, the meat strips begin to dry in the sun and wind, already darkening and shrinking slightly. Good pemmican keeps for years, Bill explains as he carefully strains the rendered fat through a piece of cloth. Not months, years. No spoilage, no waste. The concept is remarkable. Food that remains edible longer than many manufactured goods. In a world without refrigeration, such preservation was the difference between survival and starvation. Lewis and Clark carried it across the continent, you recall from your reading. Bill nods. Indians taught them. Taught all of us. Cree made the best. Name comes from their word, pimihkan. While the fat cools and the meat continues drying, Bill forages nearby, returning with a small pouch of dried berries. Gathered these last fall, he explains. Service berries, some call them June berries, good for pemmican. You've been carrying dried berries all this time. You ask, surprised? Bill shrugs. Never know what you'll need. In winter might be the only plant food available, good against scurvy. The meat strips require a full day and night of drying. Bill rotates them periodically, ensuring even exposure. By the next afternoon, they've transformed into nearly black, completely dehydrated pieces that snap rather than bend when tested. Now the grinding, Bill announces. Without a proper mortar and pestle, you improvise. Bill places the dried meat strips on a flat rock, then uses another rock to pound them into powder. It's laborious work that you take turns at, crushing handful after handful until you have a substantial pile of what looks like coarse, reddish-brown flour. Mix in the berries, Bill instructs, crushing these as well, though not as finely as the meat. The final step is combining everything. Bill reheats some of the rendered fat until it's liquid, then gradually mixes it with the meat berry powder. The proportion seems to be about equal parts by volume. Half fat, half meat and berries. Too little fat, it falls apart and spoils, Bill explains. Too much, it's just greasy. The mixture is worked until consistent, a sticky, dense mass that smells strongly of meat and rendered fat. Not appetizing by city standards, but out here, its rich caloric promise makes it beautiful. Now we shape it, Bill says, taking portions of the warm mixture and forming them into flat cakes about the size of your palm and half an inch thick. Some make balls, some press it into rawhide containers. Cakes dry best. The pemmican cakes are placed on clean branches to cool and solidify. As they do, Bill fashions small pouches from pieces of the deer's hide, a quick field-expedient solution for storage. In a proper camp, you'd smoke the hide first, he explains as he works. But these will do for now. By evening, you have about 20 pounds of pemmican packed into small hide pouches, each carefully tied to keep air out. That's 2 weeks of survival, Bill says with satisfaction, stowing most of the pouches in his pack, maybe a month if stretched. To celebrate your successful production, dinner is fresh deer steaks cut from the portions not made into pemmican. After days of beaver and fish, the venison tastes incredible, rich, tender and flavorful when cooked over the open fire. Try some, Bill says after the meal, cutting a small piece from one of the pemmican cakes. You take the offering dubiously. It's hard, waxy, and strong-smelling. Biting into it requires effort, but once in your mouth, the fat softens, releasing the flavors of the meat and berries. Different ways to eat it, Bill explains, watching your reaction. Like this is simplest. Can also fry it or drop in stew to thicken. Some mix with flour to make bread if they have it. The taste is unusual but not unpleasant, intensely savory from the meat, with occasional sweet bursts from the berries and a richness from the fat that satisfies in a primal way. Grows on you, Bill says, noting your thoughtful expression, especially when it's all that stands between you and starving. That night, as you sit by the fire, Bill seems more talkative than usual, perhaps satisfied with the day's productive work. "Winter of 24, he begins, staring into the flames. "Was up near the Yellowstone. Bad storm came through. Snowed for 6 days straight. Couldn't hunt, couldn't trap, couldn't travel." He takes a sip from his tin cup of pine needle tea. "Had pemmican though, 8 pounds of it. Ate a little each day, melted snow for water, waited it out." When the storm finally broke, nearest post was 60 miles away. Took me 4 days to reach it through chest-deep snow. Without that pemmican. He doesn't finish the sentence, but he doesn't need to. "The thing about the mountain life," Bill continues after a while, "isn't that it's always hard. It's that it turns hard without warning. Blue sky to blizzard in an hour, plenty to nothing overnight. Man who doesn't prepare dies when the turn comes." The pemmican represents more than food. It's a philosophy. Plan for the worst while things are good. Never assume tomorrow will be like today. Always have a reserve for when luck runs out. "How long have you been doing this?" you ask, genuinely curious about the man who's become your reluctant mentor. Bill considers. "First came west in 15, 16 years now." He pokes at the fire. "Different country then, fewer trappers, more beaver, more Indians too, some friendly, some not." "Any family back east?" A slight tightening around his eyes is the only reaction. "Not anymore. You don't press further. Out here, many men carry stories they don't share, pasts they've left behind as surely as they've left civilization." The fire pops, sending sparks drifting upward into the night sky. Stars blanket the darkness above. More stars than you ever saw in St. Louis. So many they seem to crowd each other in the vastness. "Did you ever think about going back?" you ask after a comfortable silence. Bill doesn't answer immediately. When he does, his voice is quieter than usual. "Tried once, 7 years ago, made it as far as St. Louis." He shakes his head slightly. "Too many people, too much noise. Couldn't sleep with walls around me." He adds a small stick to the fire. "Lasted 3 weeks before heading back west. Some men just don't fit in towns anymore." You wonder if the same fate awaits you, if this wilderness will change you so fundamentally that civilization will eventually feel foreign and confining. The thought is both disturbing and strangely compelling. As if reading your thoughts, Bill says, "You'll go back. You're not like us old mountain men, got too much city in your blood still." "How can you tell?" you ask, unsure whether to be relieved or offended. Bill almost smiles. "You still worry about being clean." It's true. Despite adapting to many aspects of mountain life, you still make efforts to wash when possible, to keep your clothes somewhat presentable. The real mountain men seemed indifferent to such concerns, practical only to the point of preventing health issues. "Nothing wrong with going back," Bill adds. "Just different paths." The conversation drifts to practical matters, plans for tomorrow's trapping, the need to monitor the rising river, the possibility of moving camp to higher ground if the water continues to climb. As you settle into your bedroll for the night, your mind returns to the pemmican, such a simple solution to such a critical problem. Natives had developed it over generations, perfecting the ratios, the preparation, the storage. Mountain men had adopted it, recognizing its perfect suitability for their nomadic, precarious existence. So much of wilderness survival followed this pattern, not conquering nature with technology, but adapting to it with knowledge, learning its rhythms, its offerings, its dangers, and fitting yourself into its systems rather than fighting them. Outside the shelter, an owl calls into the darkness. The sound is both haunting and comforting, a reminder that the living world continues its patterns regardless of human concerns. The river flows, the animals hunt, the seasons change, all according to rhythms established long before people arrived with their traps and fires and temporary shelters. The pemmican pouches, secure in Bill's pack, represent more than food. They represent understanding, of planning, of adaptation, of using what's available to bridge the gap between abundance and scarcity. Your last thought before sleep claims you is that perhaps this is the true difference between civilization and wilderness. In towns, people believe they can control their environment, bend it to their will through buildings and laws and social structures. Out here, such illusions fall away. The best one can hope for is to understand the patterns and prepare for their inevitable shifts, to know that good times end, that hard times come, and to have your pemmican ready when they do. Bill's prediction about the weather proves correct. 3 days after making the pemmican, a warm front sweeps through the mountains, bringing unusually mild temperatures that accelerate the snowmelt. The river rises steadily, not yet flooding, but swelling with murky, debris-filled water from the high country. The beaver trapping has slowed considerably. The animals seem to sense the changing conditions, becoming more cautious around your deadfalls. For 2 days you've returned empty-handed from checking the traps. Dawn of the 3rd day brings a subtle shift in Bill's routine. Instead of immediately heading for the trap line, he sits outside your shelter, carefully examining his rifle and preparing a small pack with provisions. "No trapping today?" you ask, emerging from the shelter where you've slept better than you ever thought possible on hard ground. Bill shakes his head. "Meat's running low. Time to hunt." Your pemmican stores remain substantial, but fresh meat is always preferable when available. More nutritious and better for morale. After nearly 2 weeks of beaver and the occasional fish or grouse, the prospect of venison again makes your stomach growl in anticipation. "What's the plan?" you ask, checking your own rifle, which has become an extension of your arm, never out of reach, always maintained, your life insurance in the wilderness. "First, we read the land," Bill says. "Need to know what's moving out there, where they're going." This, you realize, is a different skill from trapping. Beaver are relatively predictable, tied to waterways and visible through their constructions. Hunting larger game requires a broader understanding of animal movement and behavior throughout the terrain. You follow Bill away from camp, moving quietly through the forest as he's taught you. Instead of heading to the river or the meadow where you shot the deer for pemmican, he leads you to a game trail, a narrow path worn through the underbrush by repeated animal passage. "Stop!" Bill says after walking the trail for several hundred yards. He kneels, examining the ground with intense concentration. "Look here! What do you see?" You crouch beside him, studying the forest floor. At first, nothing stands out. Then, as your eyes adjust to really seeing rather than just looking, you notice depressions in the soft earth, tracks. Deer, you guess, noting the distinctive heart-shaped prints. Bill nods. 2 of them, doe and yearling. Moving which way? You examine the tracks more closely, trying to determine their orientation. That way? You point tentatively in the direction the prints seem to be facing. Good. How long ago? This stumps you. The tracks look like tracks. How could anyone know when they were made? No idea, you admit. Bill points to the edge of one print. "See how the soil is crumbled here, not smooth, still settling, recent, within the hour." He stands, eyes scanning the trail ahead. "Let's follow." As you move along the game trail, Bill provides a running education in tracking, the wilderness equivalent of reading. He points out details you would have missed entirely: a bent twig showing the height of the passing animal, a tuft of hair caught on a thorny bush. Droppings that indicate not just species, but diet, health, and timing. "Fresh," he says, touching a deer dropping with the back of his hand. still warm. They're close. The tracking lesson continues as Bill shows you how different animals leave different signs, not just in their footprints, but in how they move through the landscape. Deer browse as they travel, he explains, showing where vegetation has been nipped off at distinctive angles. Taking bits here and there, not eating everything in one spot. He points out other signs you never would have noticed, marks on trees where bucks have rubbed their antlers, areas where deer have bedded down leaving body-shaped depressions in the grass, slight changes in vegetation that indicate regular travel paths. Thinking like a deer yet? Bill asks after about an hour of tracking. Not really, you admit. Need to. Hunter doesn't just follow tracks, becomes the animal he's hunting, knows its hunger, its fears, its habits. I talked to a modern professional tracker about this concept. It's not mystical, he explained. It's deep observation combined with knowledge of animal behavior. The best trackers put themselves into the mind of their prey, asking where they would go for food, water, or safety if they were that animal. The game trail leads toward a small clearing. Before reaching it, Bill drops to a crouch, motioning for you to do the same. Winds in our favour, he whispers, coming from them to us. They won't smell us. You creep forward until you can see into the clearing. There they are, the doe and yearling you've been tracking, peacefully grazing on the fresh spring growth. Beautiful animals, alert but unaware of your presence. Bill raises his rifle, then surprises you by lowering it again. You're shot, he says quietly. A test. After weeks of instruction, Bill is evaluating whether you've learned enough to secure your own food. The responsibility settles on your shoulders like a physical weight. You raise your rifle slowly, trying to mimic Bill's fluid, unhurried movements that don't trigger an animal's alert response. The doe is slightly closer, presenting her broadside, the ideal shot placement for a clean kill. You take careful aim, remembering Bill's instructions from previous hunting discussions. Behind the shoulder, where heart and lungs present the largest target area, breathe normally, squeeze, don't pull. The rifle cracks, shattering the forest quiet. The doe drops immediately. The yearling bounds away in panic, disappearing into the trees before you could even consider a second shot. Good, Bill says simply, rising from his position. The approval warms you more than it should. After weeks of criticism and correction, the simple acknowledgement of competence feels like high praise. Field dressing the deer is now familiar work. Still not pleasant, but necessary and no longer shocking. You and Bill work efficiently, removing the internal organs, saving what's useful, and preparing the carcass for transport. Too much to carry whole, Bill decides. We'll butcher here. Take what we need. The process is methodical and wasteful by necessity. Without refrigeration or adequate preservation supplies, you can only take what you'll use in the next few days. The rest must be left, a bounty for the forest's scavengers. Nothing's truly wasted out here, Bill says, seeming to read your thoughts. What we leave feeds something else. Circle keeps turning. With the best portions of meat wrapped in the deer's hide, you begin the trek back to camp. Bill, however, takes a different route than the one you came by. Why this way, you ask, adjusting the heavy burden across your shoulders. Learning opportunity, he answers cryptically. About half a mile from where you shot the deer, Bill stops abruptly, studying the ground. He motions you over. Different tracks. What made these? You examine the prints in the soft earth. They're nothing like deer tracks, larger, round, with what might be toe marks at the front. Bear? You guess, remembering the grizzly you saw across the river days ago. Bill shakes his head. Look closer. No claw marks. Bears leave claw prints. You look again. He's right. The tracks show distinct toes, but no claw impressions extending beyond them. Mountain lion, Bill says. Cat retracts its claws when walking, only extends them for climbing or killing. A chill runs through you despite the warm day. Mountain lions were among the most dangerous predators in these mountains, stealthy, powerful, and capable of taking down prey much larger than a human. Recent, you ask, glancing nervously at the surrounding forest. Day or two old, Bill assesses. Moving that way. He points in a direction thankfully opposite from your camp. Good to know what's around, he continues, resuming the journey. Territory overlaps. Their prey is our prey. Their dangers are our dangers. As you walk, Bill delivers an ongoing education in reading the landscape, not just for deer or predators, but for all the information it contains. Disturbed ground there, he points. Turkey scratching for insects. Good eating if we can find them. Further on, see those saplings, tops eaten off clean. Elk been through here, too tall for deer to reach. Every sign, every trace tells a story to those who know how to read it. The forest is not silent to Bill. It's constantly communicating, revealing its secrets to his trained eye. Back at camp, you help Bill hang the deer meat in the smoke of a small, carefully maintained fire to preserve it longer. Some portions are set aside for immediate cooking, a welcome change from your recent diet. As the venison steaks sizzle over the coals, Bill continues, your education. Tracking's not just for hunting, he explains, cleaning his knife methodically. It's for survival. Knowing what's around you, what's been through, what might be coming. He describes how different scenarios require different tracking skills. In winter, tracks in snow were easier to spot but could disappear with fresh snowfall. In dry conditions, dust and bent grass became the readable signs. In forests, broken twigs and disturbed leaf litter told the story. Man, who can't read sign, is blind out here, Bill says. Might as well walk off a cliff. After eating, the venison as delicious as you remembered, Bill makes an unusual suggestion. Tomorrow, you track me. What? The proposal catches you off guard. I'll leave camp at dawn, get an hour head start. You follow. Let's see what you've learned. The challenge is both exciting and intimidating. Bill has decades of wilderness experience and knows every trick for covering his trail. You have a few weeks of basic instruction and still miss obvious signs. What if I can't find you? You ask. Then you learn a valuable lesson, Bill answers, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Don't get separated from those who know more than you. That night, sleep comes slowly, despite your physical exhaustion. Your mind is too busy processing the day's lessons, cataloguing the various signs and their meanings, preparing for tomorrow's challenge. When you finally drift off, you dream of tracks in mud, of following invisible trails, of reading stories written in bent grass and broken twigs. Dawn arrives with thin mist clinging to the forest floor. As promised, Bill is already gone when you wake, his bedroll empty, his pack missing. The challenge has begun. You prepare quickly, eating a small piece of pemmican and filling your water skin from the river. Your rifle, as always, is your constant companion. With a deep breath to center yourself, you begin. The first signs are easy. Too easy. Obvious boot prints leading from camp toward the river. This is suspicious. Bill wouldn't leave such clear tracks unless it's a false trail. He's doubled back somewhere, leaving obvious signs to lead you astray. You circle the camp perimeter, scanning for less obvious disturbances. There, a slight discoloration on a tree trunk where someone has brushed against it, transferring oils from skin or clothing, and beyond it, a nearly imperceptible compression in the leaf litter, possibly from a carefully placed foot. You follow this subtler trail, moving slowly, eyes constantly scanning for the next sign. Tracking, you realize, is a form of mindfulness. It requires complete presence, total attention to the smallest details. Your awareness narrows to the immediate environment, the placement of leaves, the angle of broken twigs, the minute disturbances in nature's patterns. An hour passes as you follow Bill's trail through the forest. Sometimes you lose it completely, forcing you to circle in ever-widening loops until you pick it up again. Other times, the sign is surprisingly clear, as if he's testing different aspects of your observation skills. The trail leads away from the river, up a gentle slope covered with pines. Here, on the needle-covered ground, tracking becomes even more challenging. Pine needles don't hold distinct footprints, but they do show disturbance patterns where they've been stepped on and compressed. Near the ridgetop, the trail simply vanishes. You circle, search, examine every stick and stone, but find nothing. It's as if Bill simply disappeared. Thinking like a deer yet. Bill's voice comes from directly behind you. You spin, startled. He's standing not 10 feet away, leaning against a tree, watching you with that same almost smile. "How long have you been there?" you ask. "About 20 minutes. Watched you circle the same area 5 times. "Where did you go?" "The trail just stopped." Bill points to a fallen log nearby. "I walked on that for 50 yards, then stepped onto rocks. No prints either way." Basic tracking countermeasures, using hard surfaces that don't take prints. "You should have thought of that, but you found me this far," Bill acknowledges. "Not bad for a greenhorn. Wouldn't have managed that your first week out." Again, that warm glow from minimal praise. "You're starting to understand the mountain man economy of approval. Given rarely, valued highly." How would you track someone who knows all these tricks, you ask? Someone who walks on logs and rocks and covers their trail? Bill considers the question. Look for what they can't control. Everyone disturbs the world by passing through it. Birds flush, dew brushes off grass, spiderwebs break. Nature has patterns. People interrupt them. On the walk back to camp, Bill expands your education beyond animal tracking to include human sign, different moccasin patterns that identify tribal affiliations, how to estimate group size, direction of travel, and how heavily burdened they are, how to tell if they're aware they're being followed. Blackfeet travel in larger groups, usually family units, he explains. Crow more often in small war parties. Shoshone leave different marks intentionally, messages for those who follow. The politics of the wilderness were complex, shifting alliances, territorial disputes, trading relationships. Mountain men had to navigate these human currents as carefully as they navigated rivers and mountain passes. Most dangerous animal out here walks on 2 legs, Bill says, matter-of-factly. Bears are predictable. People aren't. Back at camp by midday, you help Bill secure the remaining deer meat and check the beaver pelts drying on their frames. The work has become routine now, your hands remembering the motions without conscious thought. Making progress, Bill observes, examining one of the pelts you stretched. Might make a trapper of you yet. High praise, you reply with a smile. Bill shrugs. Truth is truth. As evening approaches, bringing cooler air down from the mountains, you sit by the fire and reflect on how much you've learned in the weeks since joining Bill. Not just skills, fire-making, tracking, trapping, but a different way of seeing the world, of being in it. The forest that once seemed a chaotic, threatening wilderness now reveals its patterns and systems to your more educated eye. You notice things you would have missed completely when you first arrived. The slight movement of animals in the underbrush, the changing bird song that indicates time of day, the subtle shifts in wind that carry different scents and information. Bill, you say after a comfortable silence, do you ever miss anything about civilization? He considers the question longer than you expected. Books, he finally answers. Had some schooling as a boy, liked reading, out here, lucky to see a newspaper once a year at Rendezvous. The answer surprises you. Of all the comforts and conveniences of town life, books seem an unexpected choice. What did you like to read? You ask. History, mostly. Stories of other times, other places. A log shifts in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. Ironic, I suppose. Spent my life making the kind of history nobody'll ever write down. The observation strikes you as profoundly true. The mountain men were creating history daily, pushing into unmapped territories, establishing relationships with native peoples, learning the land in ways no outsiders ever had, yet most of their stories would never be recorded. Their knowledge passed only through oral tradition among their kind. Someone should write it down, you suggest, before it's lost. Bill glances at you. Maybe that'll be your job when you go back east. Tell them what it was really like out here, not the romantic nonsense they print in those penny dreadfuls. The thought takes root in your mind. You've been keeping mental notes all along, observing not just the skills, but the philosophy of mountain life. The world view that allows men like Bill to thrive where others would perish. As darkness settles fully around your camp, the fire becomes a small island of light and warmth in the vast wilderness. Overhead, stars appear in their thousands, more brilliant and numerous than you ever saw in St. Louis. Get some sleep, Bill says, settling onto his bedroll. Tomorrow we check the trapline again. River's dropping, beaver might be moving more freely now. You lie back on your own bedding, the ground no longer uncomfortable to your adapted body. The fire pops and hisses. An owl calls from somewhere in the forest. The sounds have become familiar, almost comforting. Your last thought before sleep claims you is about tracks, not just those left by animals on the forest floor, but the invisible ones people leave on each other's lives. Bill is certainly leaving his mark on yours, teaching you not just how to survive in the wilderness, but how to read the world more deeply, to see the patterns and connections most people miss entirely. The most important tracking lesson, perhaps, is learning to see what's really there. Not what you expect or hope or fear, but what actually exists. To observe without judgment or preconception. To let the land tell its own story. As consciousness fades, you wonder what tracks you might be leaving behind, what story someone might read in your passing through this wild country, and whether, like the mountain men before you, your trail will eventually fade back into the landscape, leaving no trace that you were ever here at all. Time in the wilderness follows different rhythms than in civilization. Days blend together, marked not by clocks or calendars, but by the arc of the sun, the phases of the moon, the gradual shifting of seasons. 6 weeks have passed since you first met Bill. 6 weeks of daily lessons in survival, in reading the land, in becoming something different than the city man who first ventured west seeking adventure and profit. The morning air carries the scent of early summer now. The brutal cold of early spring has yielded to pleasant days and cool nights. The forest has transformed. Dense green foliage where once bare branches stood, wildflowers dotting meadows, berries beginning to form on bushes. You sit outside the half-faced shelter that has been home for nearly a month, carefully packing the beaver pelts that represent your time in the mountains. 26 prime pelts, each properly stretched, dried and now folded fur side in for transport. Not the 40 Bill had mentioned as ideal, but respectable for the shortened season and improvised trapping methods. Worth about $100, Bill assesses, watching you work. Your share would be $30 plus whatever the company pays you. $30, equivalent to several months' wages for a labourer back east. Not the fortune you dreamed of when heading west, but substantial nonetheless. And purchased at a cost far beyond money. In sweat, discomfort, fear, and hard-won knowledge. We head out tomorrow, Bill says, checking his rifle with the meticulous care that has become as natural as breathing. 2 days to reach the green if the weather holds. The rendezvous, the legendary gathering of mountain men, traders, Indians and company agents that mark the end of the trapping season. After weeks with no human contact beyond Bill, the prospect of seeing other people seems almost surreal. Will it be overwhelming, you ask, thinking of how accustomed you've become to silence, to the absence of crowds and noise? Bill seems to understand your concern. For the first day, always is, then you remember how it works. You've changed in ways that are difficult to articulate. Your body has transformed, harder, leaner, toughened by constant exertion and exposure. Your hands, once soft from office work, now bear calluses and small scars from countless practical tasks. Your face, when glimpsed in still water, appears weathered, beard grown full from weeks without a razor. But the deeper changes are internal. Your senses have sharpened. You notice sounds, smells, and movements that would have escaped you entirely 6 weeks ago. Your patience has expanded. Hours of waiting during hunts or trapping no longer seem tedious but natural. Your understanding of the land has deepened. What once seemed chaotic wilderness now reveals its patterns and systems to your educated eye. Your last chance to get everything in order, Bill says, nodding toward your belongings scattered around camp. Once we leave, we don't come back. The task of breaking camp is bittersweet. This rough shelter, this small clearing by the river, has become a kind of home. For all its discomforts and dangers, it represents a place where you've grown, learned, changed. The afternoon is spent in methodical preparation, packing the precious beaver pelts, selecting which tools and equipment to carry, deciding what must be left behind. Space and weight are at a premium for the journey. Every item must justify the effort of transporting it. What about the shelter, you ask, gesturing to the half-faced structure that has protected you from rain, snow and wind. Leave it, Bill says simply. Might serve someone else in need, or return to the forest in time. The philosophy runs deep among mountain men. Take what you need, leave what you don't. Make your impact temporary. No permanent claim on the land, just a brief intersection with its eternal cycles. That evening, your last in this camp, Bill seems unusually reflective. Perhaps it's the transition from wilderness solitude to the relative civilization of rendezvous that prompts his rare openness. First season's the hardest, he says, staring into the small fire. Either breaks a man or remakes him. Which happened to me? You ask. Bill studies you across the flames. Still being remade. Process takes time. You think about the man who left St. Louis months ago. Full of romantic notions about frontier life. Eager for adventure, completely unprepared for the reality of the wilderness. That version of yourself seems impossibly naive now, almost a stranger. Will I ever see the world the same way again, you wonder aloud. Bill shakes his head slowly. Can't step in the same river twice, can't unknow what you've learned. Eyes open, stay open. You sleep restlessly that night, your mind cycling through memories of the past weeks, moments of fear and triumph, of discovery and disappointment, of growing competence and lingering inadequacy. The forest sounds that once seemed threatening now form a familiar symphony. The hoot of owls, the distant howl of wolves, the rustle of night creatures in the underbrush. Dawn comes with a heavy mist rising from the river, turning the forest ethereal. You rise before Bill for once, quietly stoking the fire and preparing a simple breakfast of the last deer meat. The act of cooking in this place one final time feels significant, a small ceremony marking the end of this chapter. Bill emerges from the shelter, noticing your unusual earliness with a raised eyebrow but no comment. Together you eat in companionable silence, watching the mist gradually burn away as the sun climbs above the mountains. "Time," Bill finally says, extinguishing the fire with careful thoroughness. The packs are heavy, yours with the beaver pelts and basic equipment, Bill's with the essential tools of mountain life and whatever personal items he carries from place to place. Your rifle, as always, remains in your hands or within immediate reach. With one last look at the camp that has been your home, you follow Bill into the forest, heading west toward the Green River and the rendezvous beyond. The journey begins in silence, each of you absorbed in your own thoughts. The familiar weight of the pack, the rhythm of walking through varied terrain, the constant awareness of surroundings, all have become second nature now. Around midday, you cross from the drainage basin of your trapping river into new territory. The landscape subtly shifts. Different rock formations, slight changes in vegetation, unfamiliar game trails. Bill navigates with the confidence of long experience, occasionally pointing out landmarks visible in the distance. "Ridge there marks the divide," he explains, indicating a distant line of higher peaks. "Cross that, we're in Green River country." The walking is harder than expected after weeks of relatively stationary camp life. By late afternoon, your shoulders ache from the pack and blisters threaten despite your toughened feet. Bill selects a campsite near a small creek, dropping his pack with practiced ease. "Rest here tonight. Push over the divide tomorrow." The temporary camp requires minimal setup, no elaborate shelter needed in the mild weather, just a small fire and cleared space for bedrolls. You help gather wood, your body moving through the familiar tasks automatically while your mind wanders. "Bill," you say as night falls and you sit beside the small fire, "do you ever wonder if this life will disappear, if there will come a time when no one remembers how to do what you do?" He pokes at the fire, sending sparks drifting upward into the darkening sky. "All things end," he says simply. "Beaver getting trapped out, companies pushing west, settlers following, times coming when there won't be room for men who need empty spaces." The acknowledgement holds a quiet sadness. Bill and men like him represent not just a profession but a way of life, a particular relationship with the land that can only exist in places untamed by civilization. "That's why I agreed to show you," he continues after a long silence, "not just so you wouldn't die your first week out, but so someone would remember how it was done, how it felt, the real story, not the tall tales they'll tell later." You're struck by the unexpected trust implied in his words. The gruff, reluctant mentor has been silently evaluating you all along, deciding whether you were worthy of carrying forward some piece of his vanishing world. "I'll remember, you promise, and I'll tell it true." A nod is his only response, but it feels significant, a contract of sorts between you, your obligation to preserve something of this life and these skills that would otherwise fade into history without record. Morning brings clear skies and the hardest day's travel yet. The climb over the ridge is steep, the air noticeably thinner at higher elevation. By midday you reach the pass, a relatively flat area between two higher peaks. Bill stops, allowing you to catch your breath and take in the view. Before you stretches a new watershed, the vast drainage of the Green River. Miles of forest, meadow and rocky terrain unfold toward the horizon, a wilderness so vast it seems impossible it could ever be tamed. Down there, Bill says, pointing to a distant valley, that's where they'll gather. 100, maybe 200 men. Indians too. Biggest collection of scoundrels, heroes, liars and legends you'll ever see in one place. The descent is easier physically, but demands careful footing on loose rock and steep slopes. By late afternoon, you've dropped back into the thicker forest of the lower elevations. The character of the woods is different here, more aspen mixed with the pines, undergrowth more lush from a different pattern of rainfall. Bill's pace increases slightly, a subtle indication of his anticipation of rendezvous after months of isolation. Though he'd never admit it, even the most solitary mountain man valued the annual gathering, the chance to trade stories, share information about territories and tribes, and briefly enjoy the rough camaraderie of those who understood this life. Camp that night is made with minimal effort. The weather mild, the location less carefully selected than usual. Tomorrow will bring you to rendezvous, and the careful isolation of the trapping life will give way to the controlled chaos of the gathering. What should I expect, you ask, as darkness falls and the stars emerge overhead? Bill considers the question. Noise, trading, drinking, stories bigger than the mountains. Some true, most not. He adds a stick to the fire. Company men in clean clothes looking down their noses at the men who make them rich. Indians watching it all, trading furs and horses, keeping their own counsel. Sounds overwhelming after all this quiet, you observe. It is, Bill acknowledges. First day, just watch. Get your bearings. Don't believe half of what you hear. Don't drink what they offer unless you've seen where it came from. Don't gamble unless you can afford to lose. Practical advice, as always. You wonder how you'll appear to others there. Still a greenhorn by mountain standards, but no longer the naive city man who first ventured west. Something in between, carrying the visible and invisible marks of your time in the wilderness. What will you do? After rendezvous, you ask. Bill shrugs slightly. Resupply. Maybe head north toward the Yellowstone. Maybe west to the Snake. Depends on what news comes in about beaver populations, tribal movements. Always moving, you observe. That's the life, he confirms. Stay too long in one place, you trap it out. Or someone decides it's their territory. Or you get too comfortable and make mistakes. The impermanence of the mountain man's existence strikes you anew. No fixed home, no permanent community, just seasonal rhythms and the constant calculation of resources, opportunities and dangers. Freedom of a sort, but purchased at the price of stability. Sleep comes easily, despite the anticipation of tomorrow's arrival at rendezvous. Weeks of physical exertion have taught your body to take rest when available, to store energy for the challenges ahead. You wake to Bill's voice, unusually urgent. Up, now. The tone brings you instantly alert, hand reaching for your rifle before you're fully conscious. Dawn has barely broken, the forest still shadowed and grey. What is it? You whisper, scanning for danger. Bill nods toward the edge of your small camp. We have company. In the dim light, you make out 3 figures standing motionless among the trees. Indians, their faces painted for war, each armed with a mixture of traditional weapons and trade rifles. Your heart hammers against your ribs, but you follow Bill's lead, making no sudden movements, keeping your rifle ready but not aimed directly at the visitors. Crow, Bill says quietly. War party, but small one, probably looking for Blackfeet, not us. One of the warriors steps forward slightly, speaking in his own language. Bill listens, then responds with a mixture of words and hand signs, the trade language of the frontier that bridged different tribal tongues. The exchange continues briefly, then Bill reaches slowly into his pack and removes a small pouch of tobacco, one of his few luxury items carefully rationed throughout your time in the mountains. Gift, he explains to you as he offers it to the lead warrior, shows respect, shows we're not enemies. The warrior accepts the tobacco with dignity, saying something that makes the other two nod in agreement. They're warning us, Bill translates. Blackfeet war party. Maybe dozen braves crossed north of here 2 days ago, heading for rendezvous, he thinks, planning to steal horses. The information changes everything. A Blackfeet raiding party near the rendezvous would create serious danger, not just for the gathered trappers, but for anyone travelling alone in the area. We need to warn the others, you say. Bill nods, exchanging a few more words and signs with the Crow warriors. They're continuing south. We go west, fast as we can. Might beat the Blackfeet there if we push hard. The Crow warriors disappear into the forest as silently as they appeared, leaving you and Bill to hurriedly break camp. The encounter has demonstrated yet another aspect of wilderness survival, the complex human element, the diplomacy required to navigate relationships with various tribal groups. The day's journey takes on new urgency. Bill sets a pace that challenges your endurance, stopping only briefly for water and a few bites of pemmican. The direct threat of a Blackfeet war party transforms the landscape around you. Every shadow might hide watchers. Every sound could signal danger. By mid-afternoon, when you'd normally be thinking about making camp, Bill pushes onward. Smoke ahead, he says, pointing to a barely visible haze in the distant sky. Rendezvous fires. We keep moving. Your legs ache, your shoulders burn from the heavy pack, but you match Bill's relentless pace. The knowledge you carry could prevent deaths, a responsibility that overrides personal discomfort. As dusk approaches, you catch glimpses through the trees of a large clearing beside a river, the rendezvous. Fires are visible now, dozens of them dotting the gathering space. The distant sound of voices carries on the evening air, the first human voices besides Bill's you've heard in months. You expect to head directly into the encampment, but Bill veers slightly, approaching from an angle that keeps you in the tree line longer. Caution, he explains simply. Never rush into any situation, even one that seems safe. From the forest edge, you survey the scene before you. Tents and temporary shelters spread across the clearing. Men gather in clusters around fires. Horses graze in a makeshift corral. Indian teepees stand slightly separate from the main camp, their distinctive shapes silhouetted against the darkening sky. Lot of people, you observe, suddenly aware of how accustomed you've become to solitude. 150, maybe more, Bill estimates. Good turnout this year. Before stepping into the open, Bill takes a moment to scan the perimeter of the encampment. No extra guards posted, he notes with disapproval. News of Blackfeet hasn't reached them yet. You follow Bill into the camp, immediately struck by the sensory overload after weeks in the quiet forest. Voices call out in English, French, Spanish, and various native languages. The smells of cooking food, unwashed bodies, horses, and smoke create a pungent mixture. Movement everywhere draws your eye, a stark contrast to the subtle, slow rhythms of the wilderness. Several men notice Bill calling greetings or raising hands in recognition. He acknowledges them with nods but moves purposefully toward a larger tent at the camp's center, clearly seeking someone specific. A well-dressed man emerges from the tent, clean-shaven, wearing a coat despite the warm evening. The company agent, you realize, the representative of the fur trading company that financed most of these mountain men's expeditions. Harrison, Bill addresses him without preamble. Blackfeet war party moving this way. Dozen braves at least. Crow Scouts spotted them 2 days ago north of here. The agent's expression shifts from initial irritation at the interruption to focused concern. You're certain? Crow have no reason to lie about Blackfeet, Bill says simply. Need to post guards. Warn the men. Secure the horses. Harrison nods, immediately turning to give orders to several nearby men. The camp's casual atmosphere transforms as the news spreads. Men checking weapons, moving horses closer to the main encampment, organizing watch rotations. You follow Bill as he makes his way to a less crowded section of the camp, finally dropping his pack with a grateful sigh. Now we wait, he says, settling onto a fallen log. Warning's been given, preparations made, rest is up to them. The reaction to the warning demonstrates the respect Bill commands among these men. Despite his preference for solitude, his word carries weight, earned through years of surviving what many others didn't. As night fully descends, the rendezvous takes on a different character. Fires blaze higher. Voices grow louder with drink and camaraderie. Stories flow as freely as the whiskey that many trappers save their entire season's earnings to purchase. You sit quietly beside Bill, observing the scene with the heightened awareness you've developed in the wilderness. The gathered mountain men represent a unique brotherhood, individuals who choose a life of extreme hardship and danger, who carry the knowledge of survival as their most precious possession. Like coming back to a village you visit once a year, Bill observes, watching the interactions around you. Same faces missing each time, new ones that probably won't return, few that somehow keep breathing year after year. The understanding strikes you profoundly. These annual gatherings marked not just successful seasons, but survival itself. Each man here had faced countless opportunities to die and had overcome them through skill, knowledge, or simple luck. As the night deepens, you're approached by several trappers curious about the newcomer travelling with the notoriously solitary Bill. Their questions are direct, their assessment of your worth transparent in their weathered faces. You answer honestly, neither exaggerating your accomplishments nor hiding your status as a relative beginner. One grizzled trapper slaps your shoulder after hearing of your river crossing in the bullboat. Still breathing after that. Bill must have taught you something useful then. The comment, delivered with rough humour, carries unexpected weight. You have survived. Not just existed, but learned to live in a place that kills the unprepared with indifferent ease. The realization settles into your bones, a quiet pride distinct from arrogance. Later, as many trappers have succumbed to exhaustion or whiskey, you sit with Bill away from the main fires, watching the stars wheel overhead. What will you do now? Bill asks, surprising you with the question. After rendezvous, back to St. Louis with your share of the pelts? Or another season in the mountains? The question has been forming in your own mind for weeks. The original plan, a single season to experience the wilderness before returning to civilization, no longer feels adequate. You've barely scratched the surface of what there is to learn, to understand about this life. I'm thinking I might stay, you admit. Find a partner for the next season. Keep learning. Bill nods, neither approving nor disapproving, simply acknowledging your choice. Mountains change a man, he says after a while. Some can't go back to town life after, too confining, too many rules that don't matter. Is that what happened to you, you ask? A ghost of a smile touches his weathered face. Partly just found where I belonged, same as you're doing now. The conversation drifts into comfortable silence. Around you, the rendezvous camp gradually quiets as even the most determined revelers seek sleep. Guards patrol the perimeter, alert for the Blackfeet threat that may or may not materialize. As you settle onto your bedroll under the open sky, too many years in the mountains had left Bill with a distaste for tents or enclosed spaces. You reflect on the journey that brought you here, not just the physical travel from St. Louis to this remote river valley, but the internal passage from who you were to who you're becoming. The skills you've learned, trapping, navigation, tracking, fire making, shelter building, pemmican preparation, represent more than mere techniques for staying alive. They form a philosophy, a way of seeing and being in the world that's increasingly rare even in this early period of American expansion. Self-reliance balanced with necessary community, taking what's needed without excess, reading the land's patterns rather than imposing upon them, adapting to conditions rather than trying to control them, living with danger as a constant companion rather than an unexpected visitor. These mountain men, with their rough ways and remarkable skills, are already becoming anachronisms in their own time. The wilderness they navigate will soon feel the advancing pressure of settlement, of different values and relationships with the land. But for now, in this moment, you've glimpsed a way of life that few will ever experience. You've begun to understand what it takes to survive not just physically, but spiritually, in places where humans are not the dominant species, where nature's rules supersede human desires and assumptions. Bill shifts on his bedroll nearby, already falling into the light, alert sleep of those who know danger might come at any moment, a man who has found his place in the world, however temporary and shifting that place might be. As sleep approaches, you realize that the most valuable thing Bill has taught you isn't any specific technique or skill, but a different way of being. Present, aware, connected to the immediate reality of your surroundings. Civilization encourages distraction, abstraction, removal from the physical world. The wilderness demands presence, attention, direct engagement with what is. The stars overhead seem impossibly bright, unbounded by city lights or closed rooms. The night air carries the scent of pine, wood smoke, river water. Distant sounds of the forest blend with the quiet movements of the camp. Your body, tired but stronger than it has ever been, settles into the ground beneath you. This moment, like all moments in the wilderness, is both fleeting and eternal, part of cycles that long preceded human presence and will continue long after. Your participation in these cycles, your growing understanding of their patterns and meanings, connects you to something larger than yourself. As consciousness fades, one final thought surfaces, that perhaps the most important survival skill of all is the ability to truly see the world as it is, not as you wish or fear it to be, to read its signs accurately, to respond appropriately, to find your place within its systems, rather than attempting to stand apart from them. The mountain men knew this, their lives depending on this clear-eyed engagement with reality, and now, in some small measure, so do you. Sleep comes gently, carrying you away like a leaf on a river current, flowing through dreams of forests and mountains, of tracking unseen animals through fresh snow, of fire springing from stone and steel, of skills that kept men alive in a world both beautiful and unforgiving. A world that, like the mountain men themselves, is already beginning to fade into history, leaving behind only traces for those who know how to read them.